One of the most famous chefs in the world loses everything when he suddenly can't taste food anymore. And without any explanation, he decides to abandon everything and disappear into the countryside to find peace. But what he didn't expect is that his grandfather's house hides a portal to another world. And taking this opportunity, he decides to live a quiet life, camping, cooking, and relaxing far away from everything. But the plan goes completely wrong because the people of that world start getting way too interested in him, especially in the incredible food he makes. And now, even though he just wants a peaceful life, he ends up attracting the attention of adventurers, creatures, and even entire races, turning his quiet life into something much bigger than he imagined. And the more he tries to stay low-key, the more that world simply won't let him. Alright, let's get into the video. The weather forecast for that day was rain across the entire country due to a typhoon, but that was bad news for the protagonist since he was preparing to go camping. However, the weather was still clear, and he took the opportunity to enjoy a fabulous meal thanks to his grandfather Park. He starts preparing his food as he can't resist pork belly with aged kimchi. He opens his drink and enjoys it since he also loves that, and the rain doesn't bother him. Suddenly, someone calls him and says they've already arrived. Gang Hyun thinks it was a good idea to prepare plenty. A man approaches laughing and asks if he has more drinks. Other people start showing up as well. An old man looks at the protagonist, saying it seems he brought something new. A woman apologizes for disturbing him while he rests. The place where he is isn't Earth. Somewhere else, a car stops, and someone asks if that is the place his grandfather used to run, and comments that it looks quite charming. A young man says they need to check it out and asks the man inside the car if the most famous chef in Korea is planning to open a restaurant there. The man asks the young guy if he's sure there's no one around, telling him to confirm. Last time, they let their guard down and ended up getting caught by paparazzi. The young man asks his passenger who would even follow them all the way to Pyeongchang. The masked man is the protagonist. He removes the mask and tells his bodyguard that he's right. He thinks other people might assume he has a celebrity complex, but the truth is that wherever he goes, he gets recognized by everyone. After graduating from the CIA, one of the top 3 culinary schools in the world, Gang Hyun won an international cooking competition in Paris, which drew public attention and led to invitations to appear on various TV programs. Many believed that, as a young and talented chef, his future was bright. While he was in the kitchen, a woman ran in holding her phone, shouting that she was a huge fan and wanted a photo. But the protagonist got worried because it was a kitchen, and startled, shouted at her to leave. Because of all this, he began having serious problems inside kitchens. Some people started picking on him, questioning whether he understood the trouble he was causing for those who were truly passionate about cooking, saying that if he understood, he should just quit being a chef and become a celebrity, which is what he was turning into. People also created online profiles to complain, saying his food wasn't that good and that all his fame existed only because he was handsome. On top of that, they said he had a terrible attitude, yelling at people to leave. Because of these comments, both online and in real life, he began to feel shaken and gradually lost confidence in himself, locking himself in his room with no desire to do what he loved most. But his desire to cook didn't let things end that way. He got up and thought he needed to fix things by no longer being a celebrity. Back in the present, they enter that place and his assistant asks what he thinks, since business seems to be going well. The protagonist explains that for him it's fine, since he's there just to rest a bit, without all the flashes in his face. His assistant looks confused and says that someone who truly wants to rest doesn't open a new business. Gang Hyun explains that cooking is his best way to relax, at least that's what he thinks. His friend thinks he's a cooking-obsessed maniac, but ends up agreeing with the plan. However, he thinks they should stop for a bit and eat something before setting everything up. Gang Hyun explains that there's no delivery service there, so they need to go into town to eat something. Sometime later, they manage to get something to eat, but Gang Hyun isn't happy with it at all. He gets irritated and shouts for the owner to come over, questioning if they were really selling that garbage for people to eat. His friend tries to calm him down, telling him to put the pepper down. But that's what happens when there's no competition. Since people have no other choice, the quality simply drops. The protagonist's friend decides to try a bit and says the sauce is decent. On the other hand, Gang Hyun doesn't even want to taste it because he can no longer feel the flavor of food. He remembers his problem. Some time ago, a dish fell to the ground because he felt something very strange. He went to a doctor, and the doctor explained that he had lost his sense of taste due to extreme stress. And since the cause is psychological, surgery isn't a guaranteed solution. Because of that, the doctor said it would be better for him to deal with the stress first, suggesting a hobby. That made him even more depressed at the time. His friend taps the plate to get his attention, saying he's worried and tells Gang Hyun to forget about customers. He also points out that it doesn't seem like there's anything to do there, which makes him wonder if his friend will be okay. All there is are mountains and fields, so there's nothing else to do. The protagonist says that mountains and fields are perfect, since he can camp in them. Sometime later, he's in a car thinking that he packed a small stove, a Swiss Army knife, sunscreen, a compass, and a map. The driver looks at him and asks if he's going to the beach. Gang Hyun says no and explains that he's going camping in the mountains. The driver asks why he's going like that and suggests he should bring a tube as well. The protagonist gets confused and asks why he would need a tube. The driver says he might want to think that through. Gang Hyun tells the driver to take him to Yongpyong. The driver says there's nowhere to buy tubes there, but the protagonist explains he just needs to make a few stops. Sometime later, he arrives at a place that looks like a small village. The protagonist thinks it's the first time he's been there since his grandfather passed away. He arrives at his grandfather's old house, thinking he should clean it before leaving. Suddenly, he hears a noise and notices a door open. It's the shed. He gets a little scared, thinking it might be a thief. And even while afraid, he approaches to smack the intruder with his bag. But something runs past him, showing just how brave he really is. The scare almost made him die on the spot. Still shaken but a bit calmer, he looks to the side and realizes it was just a cat. Seeing there was no danger, he tells the cat it's lucky it's just a cat, otherwise it would have had a bad time. He decides to take a better look at the shed, since the lack of maintenance means all kinds of animals have been going in and out freely. But as soon as he steps inside, he finds it a bit strange. The space inside is extremely large and doesn't seem like the same place when viewed from the outside. Suddenly, he sees some light and a faint breeze. He walks a bit further and comes across something completely unreal. A huge hole in the ground, like an open portal. Part of the ground beneath him breaks, and he falls into it. Sometime later, he wakes up and asks where he is. He feels something licking his hand and jumps up in panic. He sees it's just a squirrel, but its ears are unusually large. Suddenly, the squirrel starts flying with its ears and simply leaves. Gang Hyun hears another noise and turns around in fear, but this time it's just a completely cute and harmless rabbit. But as soon as the rabbit steps out of the bushes, it turns out to be the Ramon Dino of rabbits. However, the rabbit just ignores him and hops away. Gang Hyun starts running in panic, asking where the exit is because he needs to get out of there immediately, since that place is clearly far too dangerous. He runs for an entire day, and during the night, he collapses on the ground completely exhausted. He thinks that this time, he's doomed, since his phone has no signal and no matter how much he walks, he can't find anyone to ask for help. He remembers the doctor told him to go camping, not to get stuck in a completely strange place. He sits on the ground and grabs his bag, since even in all that chaos, he's still hungry. Shortly after, he manages to light a fire, but the problem is that what's on the ground is all he has. His food bag was left behind at the edge of the hole he fell into. He decides to prepare what he has, but first he needs to soak it. He takes some oil and pours it into the pan while stirring his food well. He adds some pepper and salt to season it, hoping it will taste a bit better. He stares deeply at the food, questioning whether he should even dare call that cooking. He decides to eat, thinking he would normally spit it out. He tries it, but as expected, it tastes horrible. He throws the pan away and sits there, irritated with the situation. While staring at the fire, depressed for not knowing where he is or having anything to eat, he hears a noise and turns in fear, seeing several glowing dots staring at him. Those dots are the eyes of something behind the bushes. Gang Hyun gets scared, thinking it might be a wolf, and grabs his knife, but he has no idea what he can do with such a small blade in his hands. The animal sticks its head out and lets out a fierce roar, making the protagonist even more terrified. He closes his eyes and just screams in fear, but then realizes nothing happened. Gang Hyun slowly opens his eyes to see what was happening there, but as soon as he looks ahead, he realizes there's nothing there anymore and wonders if it's possible the animal turned invisible. Then he starts hearing the sound of something chewing. He slowly looks toward the noise and notices the animal had eaten all the food he didn't like. The fierce and terrifying creature he thought he saw was actually just a small, cute, and happy puppy. The two stare at each other for a while, and even though confused, Gang Hyun realizes the animal isn't going to attack him. He keeps looking at the dog, thinking it might be a Siberian husky puppy. The little dog starts climbing onto his leg. Gang Hyun asks his new friend where he came from and what he's looking at, but the dog just keeps staring at him. Gang Hyun says the dog has already eaten and can go now since he doesn't really like animals. But he picks the dog up and starts petting it, saying he never understood why people think dogs are so cute. While petting it, he notices the animal is actually a wild canine, since its fur feels a bit rough. The puppy stays comfortable as if enjoying the moment. Gang Hyun looks closer and notices its claws and teeth, realizing that it's actually a wolf. Worried, the protagonist starts looking around, wondering where the mother of that little wolf is and whether it's really alone, since he had seen several glowing points earlier, so maybe those were the wolf pack. On top of that, his biggest fear is being misunderstood, as if he were stealing the cub. Completely desperate, the protagonist collapses to the ground, complaining once again about the situation, since now he will either starve to death or be eaten. The little cub starts dragging him to the side, but the protagonist says now he's going to become food, warning the cub that human flesh smells like prey. But the cub pulls him toward an opening at the base of a tree. The protagonist notices a glow, and when he looks, he shouts in excitement, realizing it's the same hole he had fallen into before, and maybe he can return home, but he wonders if he should jump right in. After thinking for a bit, he decides that might not be the best option, since he needs to calm down as that seems like a good opportunity. He looks around the hole carefully before jumping, but the little cub runs toward him and bumps into him from behind, knocking him down. Shortly after, the protagonist opens his eyes and realizes he's back in his grandfather's shed. He cries with relief, seeing that he's alive, but unfortunately he didn't even get to thank that little wolf. Emotional, he looks at the sky thinking he'll never see the wolf again. Because of that, he names the little wolf Unha, saying he'll never forget him. But when he looks to the side, he realizes the cub is right next to him and asks what it's doing there. Not knowing what to do, he takes the wolf into his room and tries to give it a bath, but the wolf shakes itself, splashing water everywhere. He wonders if he should take care of the little cub, but the truth is, he has no idea what to do, suggesting maybe the wolf should be named Baxiolgi. After several long hours trying to understand what happened, he decides to sleep and takes the little cub with him. The next morning, he wakes up and stretches, thinking he finally managed to sleep well, since it had been a long time since he slept that well. He grabs some dog food, thinking that since he wants to keep the cub, and it's a wolf, that food should work, but the cub refuses to eat. The protagonist tries offering cat food or rabbit meat, but the dog still refuses. Ganghyun gets a bit irritated asking if the dog is just going to starve, but decides to ignore it for a while, saying that if he keeps trying to figure out what the dog wants to eat, he himself won't be able to eat anything. After preparing his meal and placing it on the table, he sits down saying it's incredible how he can still cook even though he can't taste anything. Still, he doesn't lose hope, thinking there must be some food he can taste. But before he can eat, Baekseolgi jumps onto the table and devours everything in front of him. The protagonist tries to say that food isn't for him, but he keeps eating. Ganghyun realizes the cub was carefully avoiding processed foods. However, steak is something it should eat, since it's a wolf. The protagonist thinks for a moment, prepares 2 more plates, and places them in front of Baekseolgi, saying both dishes are steaks made from high-quality meat and cooked the same way. But the sauces are completely different. One is a commercial sauce, and the other is his special sauce that was praised in an international competition. Ganghyun points at Baekseolgi, saying that if he's really that picky and a gourmet, he should choose. Baekseolgi goes to the plate with the commercial sauce and starts sniffing it. The protagonist thinks the commercial sauce is certainly tasty, but if Baekseolgi chooses the special sauce, then he definitely has gourmet potential. Baekseolgi eats all the meat with the commercial sauce, wagging his tail as if it's just normal food. After that, he goes to the steak with the special sauce, and as soon as he tastes it, becomes even more excited, as if he absolutely loves the flavor. The protagonist is surprised, realizing that the little cub really does have a talent for being a gourmet. After finishing the meal, Baekseolgi looks extremely happy, and the protagonist says he never seemed like a normal wolf, and that from now on, he can't just feed him anything. On top of that, he feels it's incredibly rewarding to make something so good after such a long time. After breakfast, he starts painting the wall, but isn't very happy with the color, wondering if it's defective. Suddenly, someone approaches, telling the protagonist that he's painting the exterior when he should be painting the interior. So it's natural to get confused. The man says it's a shame since young people these days don't even know how to paint a wall properly. Ganghyun is a bit surprised and asks who he is. The man takes off his hat and says that if Ganghyun lives there, then he should be the one to introduce himself first and greet him. The old man introduces himself as the village chief and says that since the protagonist hadn't come to visit him, he decided to come see him himself. The village chief looks at the wall Ganghyun was painting and says he made a complete mess and that it seems like it's his first time doing that. He looks at Baekseolgi and asks if the protagonist is raising a dog too. Ganghyun says it's not a dog, but a wolf. The chief tells him to stop painting and says he'll contact someone who can help. Ganghyun is surprised that there's someone in the village who can help with that, but he refuses, saying there's no need to call anyone. The chief asks why he's worrying and just tells him to make time on the weekend since someone will come to help, and tells Ganghyun to stop being stingy with money. The protagonist asks him to wait, but the old man keeps insisting, telling him to set aside some time because he'll bring someone to help. Ganghyun asks if that's really okay, since he feels it's a bit awkward to ask for help like that. Sometime later, the village chief returns with a young man. He explains that he's Jong's son, who works in the fields on the other side, and that he's a good person despite his appearance. The young man introduces himself, saying his name is Jong Minyo. The protagonist also introduces himself but thinks they arrived too early. He brings them drinks and notices they were already talking about work. Ganghyun is surprised since it's not even their house, yet they were working hard anyway. The village chief looks at the protagonist and says that, thinking about it, there's no restaurant around there, and asks if that will be a restaurant. The protagonist explains he plans to open an Italian restaurant. The old man asks if he only sells leaves. Ganghyun explains he might open a Western restaurant. As soon as Minho hears that, he asks if he sells tonkatsu too. They move to the side to talk more, and Minho explains that his wife really likes tonkatsu. However, the restaurant he usually goes to is closed, and since it's a special occasion, he can't go far. So he tried making it himself, but the taste wasn't good at all. He adds that it's fine if the protagonist won't sell it since he was just curious. Ganghyun thinks that even if that dish isn't on the menu, it's relatively easy to make. He looks at the water in his glass, wondering if he would really serve a dish to a customer without knowing what it tastes like, since that would be ridiculous. so maybe it's better not to open anything. He prepares to refuse, but then sees Bexiolgi looking at him with that happy face and realizes that he can do it. He stands up and slams his hand on the table, saying he can do it. He tells Minho that he can make the tonkatsu, declaring that he will recreate the memory for him to relive with his wife. Sometime later in his kitchen, he thinks that, based on the information he heard from Minho, the sauce looks red rather than brown, as if it has tomato in it, but it is sweet. Apparently they used demi-glace, and if he uses raw tomatoes, they will turn sour. Maybe that small rural shop makes tomato paste, but if it is sweet tomato, then it is probably ketchup. After gathering everything he needs, he says that the ingredients are ready, and now only his partner, Bexiolgi, is left. But the little cub is already ready to help him. The protagonist says he is going to gain a lot from this, so his little assistant cannot get tired first. He quickly starts preparing all the ingredients, and the first portion is soon ready. Bexiolgi tastes the dish, but the protagonist notices that his tail is wagging a little less than before, and apparently, the sweetness came out too strong. He picks up another plate and gives it to the cub, but notices the tail is weak again, so he decides to test the next dish. The protagonist thinks he never liked cooking since he lost his sense of taste, but now, even though he still cannot taste anything, simply knowing there is a way to understand flavor makes it extremely fun. Minho has just arrived at Ganghyun's restaurant and asks his wife if her morning sickness has improved. She, who is pregnant, says she is doing very well, and in fact, since a restaurant has opened in town, she has been eager to try it because it has been a long time since she had tonkatsu. So she is excited and full of anticipation. Ganghyun says that if that is truly the case, then he will have to live up to her expectations, and he brings out the dish saying that the tonkatsu is ready. She's very happy because the smell really is wonderful. She cuts off a piece of meat and tries it. Minho asks what she thinks. His wife explains that the place in her hometown really was very good, but the protagonist's dish is unbelievably even better. On top of that, the sauce is the same one she remembers, but the breading is crispier and juicier, which makes everything far more delicious. She says that this is the most delicious tonkatsu she has ever eaten in her life. The protagonist is happy to hear that because he feels fulfilled. The wife, smiling happily, asks her husband if he remembers the first time they went out together, because they ate tonkatsu that day and he could barely eat, since he was so nervous that he was trembling from embarrassment. She adds that he was shaking so much that she got a little worried. Minho feels a bit embarrassed and asks if he really was trembling that much. She explains that this is why she kept eating so much tonkatsu after that, and that Minho did not even like it much at first. She looks at the plate of food and says that maybe, in truth, it was not the tonkatsu itself that mattered, but the memory of eating it together with Minho. Ganghyun is very happy seeing all of that. He looks back and sees that Bexiolgi is starting to look like a ball, but he is happy because his little assistant worked hard to help him. Sometime later, after Minho and his wife leave, the protagonist sits at the table, giving thanks for his first customer even before officially opening. But he's thinking that there is no need to cling to that specific type of food because he will have to rethink the menu. After all, there is no way to do that if places like that do not exist. The problem is that they can only be reserved and are extremely expensive. So he will have to figure it out through experience. On top of that, he also needs to figure out what he is going to do tomorrow. However, he notices that Bexiolgi does not look very happy, even though he regularly takes his dog out for walks. And the problem may be that he misses the forest where he originally lived. Maybe he is living there without really wanting to, because the animals of that world probably belong in that world. Also, his house would probably have to be bigger. Ganghyun remembers the animals he saw in the other world and thinks that maybe he will have to take the little wolf back. But just remembering what he went through in that other world scares him, and he asks himself if he really has to go back there. He decides not to go, but Bexiolgi keeps looking at him with pitiful eyes. The protagonist tries to resist until the very last moment, but in the end, he goes back. The truth is that he does not want to be there, but there is no way to ignore those eyes, and maybe if he is quick, he can return without any trouble. While walking through the forest, he wonders if this is really the place Bexiolgi wanted, because it looks just like the landscapes he used to see in comic books. As he walks, he hears the sound of water and is surprised by the lake he finds in front of him. Now he can completely understand why his little companion missed that wonderful place so much. He crouches down and tells Bexiolgi that he has one last gift to give him before they part ways. He takes a portable grill out of his bag, saying that the tonkatsu was the best one he ever made with the little wolf's help, and as a gift, he will be rewarded with expensive and delicious meat. Bexiolgi becomes extremely happy when he sees that meat. The protagonist spreads a little butter on the hot grill plate and lays the steaks down to cook. Before long, everything is ready, and Bexiolgi is eating happily to his heart's content. The protagonist looks to the side and feels a little disappointed because something important is missing. He picks up a can of drink, saying that with a beautiful view like that and excellent meat, it would be a shame to go without alcohol. He takes a good swig and feels incredibly good. Even though he cannot taste it, People always say that they drink alcohol for the atmosphere, and that really is true. While he is enjoying that moment, a blade is suddenly placed near his neck. The person holding the sword says that judging by the protagonist's appearance, he's probably not from that village, but a stranger he has never seen before. And even with an artifact, he cannot tell what his identity is. The protagonist gets scared and asks if that is really a real sword. The man holding the sword asks if the protagonist is some kind of magician or a scout from another country, ordering him to answer immediately and state his identity. But the protagonist is far too frightened because all he can think about is that sword, since he never imagined he would experience having a sword at his throat in his entire life. Gang Hyeon says that he is just a cook, and the man asks if he is telling the truth. The protagonist says yes, and that he is definitely not a suspicious person. The man questions why a cook would be there. The protagonist explains that he was merely admiring the scenery, but the man does not believe that and asks how anyone could admire the scenery in the middle of a monster-infested forest. He presses the sword even closer to the protagonist's neck, and the protagonist asks him to be careful because with one careless move he will lose his life. The man remains irritated, shouting that if Gang Hyeon does not honestly explain his purpose there, he will not leave alive. Baek looks at the man, who gets startled when he sees that wolf. The protagonist truly does not know what to do. He tells the man that he could offer money unless the currency there is different, but he says that if the man spares his life, he will find some way to reward him. The man simply puts away his sword and begins speaking a little more politely, explaining that this is not a place ordinary people can enter easily. He introduces himself, saying that he is a knight of the lower territory and that his name is Rodolfo. Gang Hyeon introduces himself as well, giving his name, though he feels a little confused seeing how suddenly the knight changed his attitude. Rodolfo points out that he has never seen a white wolf before, so he believed it only existed in legends, and the fact that the protagonist has one proves that he is not weak. But Gang Hyeon asks what he is talking about. The knight asks if the protagonist really does not know what that white wolf is. He begins explaining that the white wolf is a descendant of the ancient god. In other words, they could say that the white wolf is a descendant of the wolf god. The wolf god of creation could distinguish between good and evil. In addition, the stories say he possessed great wisdom, and the descendant of the white wolf inherited part of that ability as well. And this white wolf from the stories is the protagonist's companion. Hearing all of that, Gang Hyeon thinks that it explains everything his companion has done up until now. The amount of food he could eat and the agility he possessed were because he is descended from a god. Rodolfo stares at the protagonist and says he has no idea what he is thinking, but apparently that is not the case. He asks if the protagonist was really eating while looking at the lake because it must be especially delicious to eat in a place like that. The knight looks at the portion of meat on the plate and asks what kind of meat it is. Gang Hyeon explains that it is beef and offers him some, but the knight refuses, saying that he already ate a little earlier and should not have done that but could not help himself. Even so, he thinks the situation is extremely troublesome because he is supposed to be investigating, but the smell of that food is becoming very hard to resist. He tells the protagonist that he would like to try just one bite, and when he tastes the meat, he is amazed, asking himself what kind of meat could have juices like that, since it is so tender it melts in the mouth, and meat of that quality is not easy to find. Rodolfo looks at the protagonist's hand and asks what it is that he is holding. Gang Hyeon explains that it is alcohol, but Rodolfo does not know what that is and asks if this so-called alcohol comes from the region where the protagonist lives, because it looks strangely made. However, his curiosity is very high, and he asks if it has any familiar kind of taste. The protagonist asks if he wants to try it, but the knight refuses, saying no, he was only curious, and there is no need for that. But then he takes the can, saying that since it was offered as a gift, it would be very rude of him to refuse. Gang Hyeon holds onto his own can, saying that this is the one he was already drinking from and offers the knight a new can instead. Rodolfo opens the can and says it does not seem like an artifact, but rather an interesting item. After tasting it, he says that it is beer and extremely refreshing. Gang Hyeon thinks the knight is very different from when he first pulled out his sword, and looking at him this way, he almost seems like a foreigner. Rodolfo is so delighted with all that food that he tells the protagonist he simply cannot ignore such kindness, and that if he ever wants to visit the village, he only needs to ask because he is Rodolfo, captain of the Reventus Knights. So, if he asks for that name, he will be able to find him. Upon hearing that he is a knight captain, the protagonist thinks that maybe he is the commander of a company. Rodolfo feels slightly displeased when he sees that the protagonist did not show even a bit of surprise after hearing his rank, which proves that he is definitely not an ordinary person. Before leaving, the knight tells the protagonist that he wanted to warn him to be careful, because one never knows what may happen there. But since he has a white wolf by his side, he will probably be fine. Baek shows that he wants more food. Rodolfo explains that he was on patrol, so he needs to return immediately, and says that he hopes they can meet again. The protagonist asks him to wait, but then starts thinking that the knight was on patrol, which means he was drinking while working. He begins to wonder whether they really can drink while on duty in that world, because perhaps the standards are a little different there. Baek keeps begging for food. Ganghyun throws the rest of the meat to him and says that it is the last piece, so he needs to enjoy it. While looking at the little wolf, he thinks that thanks to the little guy, things have been lively for quite a while, so it will feel very lonely to leave his new friend behind. He takes a deep breath and says that although it was only for a short time, it was very pleasant, and thanks to the little wolf, he can make tonkatsu now. He says goodbye, saying he does not know whether they will meet again, but asks his friend to stay healthy until that day comes. He starts walking away but looks back, thinking there is no use crying over spilled milk, because they have only known each other for a short time. Even so, he has started to grow attached. Completely downhearted, he looks back one more time, but is surprised to see that the white wolf is no longer there. He feels a little upset and turns to leave, but Baek grabs onto his bag and Ganghyun asks why he is there. After quite a struggle, the bag is completely ruined, and Ganghyun asks his friend why he is acting like that. Baek comes up to him and starts licking his hand. The protagonist is a little confused, wondering why Baek is following him again, since he had wanted to return to his homeland. But Baek puts his paw on his master's hand and barks at him, as if saying he does not want them to be separated. Ganghyun is shocked to see that his friend thinks their friendship is more important. He picks up the little wolf, saying that even after they came all the way there, the little one still would not listen. He returns to planet Earth, thinking that now he will have to go back to the other world somewhat regularly, because if he does not, his companion will probably throw a fit. In the end, though, he accepts it because if the visits are like today's, then it will not be such a problem. As he walks, he hears some people celebrating and asks what day it is and why those people are right in front of his house. The village chief sees the protagonist and asks if he is going to join in. Ganghyun greets the village chief and asks what everyone is doing there. The chief tries to explain that it is a festival because people had announced it would be that day and asks if he did not hear about it. Ganghyun says no, but thinks none of it makes any sense. Someone tells the village chief that the banner has just arrived. The protagonist says that he will just apologize because it seems that he is an unwanted guest, but the chief tells him it is fine and that he can join if he wants, explaining that this is actually a celebration for Ganghyun. Everyone was enjoying the festival, eating and playing except for the host himself. People were talking about how incredible the dish Ganghyun made for Minho must have been. A woman was squeezing his cheeks, saying how handsome he is, but the protagonist was only thinking that he wanted to go home and rest. Minho's wife tells the elders that the protagonist seems a little tired, so they need to calm down a bit. Ganghyun asks whether they always hold a festival whenever people visit a small village like that. The woman explains that it is a small village, so they have to stay united, even if only a little. The people kept enjoying the party, saying that they need to share burdens and joys together, because this is a welcoming celebration. The wife explains that she absolutely did not want to use the protagonist's situation as an excuse to start a drinking party. The village chief explains that this is just how it works, because whenever there is an occasion, everyone celebrates together, and it is good to make an appearance like that. Besides, he tells Ganghyun that he is going to open a restaurant soon, so it would be good to promote it in advance. But the protagonist wonders whether he is really there to help promote the restaurant, because if those bottle caps were not so tacky, he might have believed it. The chief goes back to the celebration, and the protagonist thinks that whether it is true or not, as long as they help promote the place, he does not mind. The people kept enjoying the place and the party, but the protagonist remained quietly in his corner, though he thinks it is not so bad. But he did not know where Baek was. People were looking at Baek, saying he looks very young and asking whose dog he is. They also said the meat looked delicious because he was eating with so much enthusiasm. People try to catch him, but he dodges everyone easily. A woman says that she brought some more meat for them because she caught a pig a few days ago and has the loin. Baek streaks past like a bolt of lightning, eating everyone's food. People say that dog looks like a ghost. On top of that, he only eats the expensive cuts of meat. Minho asks Ganghyun whether that dog is not Baek, but the protagonist, feeling a little embarrassed, says that he does not know him and thinks he should have left the white wolf in his own world. While he is eating, he notices there is also a child in that village, but he does not seem very happy. Also, he does not seem to have any friends. But fortunately, his grandmother is taking care of things. The grandmother approaches, offering him some food, but the brat stands up, slaps the food, and throws it on the ground. That makes the protagonist extremely irritated. Sang-hoo runs off without saying anything. The village chief goes over to the woman, saying that the boy is not usually like that. She explains that he has been acting that way ever since he went to school the day before. One of his friends had bragged about eating something called a hamburger in Seoul, so he kept crying and saying that he wanted to eat one too. She shows the hamburger she bought, but he did not want it. She says it is fine. The protagonist, who is listening to the whole conversation, realizes that the boy probably wanted a fast food hamburger. Suddenly, one of the festival participants raises his hand and calls the village chief, saying that he could buy a hamburger for Sang-hoo when he goes back to the city the next day. The village chief says that would be great. However, a hamburger is not something sold in the market, but at Lotte World. People ask whether he means that place with that thing called a brand. The village chief says it is fine because if they do not sell it, they can simply make it. But the old woman says that she does not even know what it is. So how could she make it? The chief explains that now they have a chef from Seoul in the village, and since he lives there, he probably knows how to make the thing sold at Lotta World. The people get excited about that, but the protagonist is not nearly as excited. The village chief walks over to him and apologizes for asking so suddenly, but says that he is the only one who could answer the question. He explains that the protagonist does not need to make something with exactly the same flavor, because Sang-hoo does not actually want to eat a hamburger. Gang-hyun gets confused and asks the village chief to explain a little better. The village chief explains that the boy is not actually craving a hamburger, but is instead jealous of his friend. This is happening because that friend traveled with his parents. Sang-hoo's mother is sick and hospitalized, and his father is overseas trying to earn money to cover her medical expenses. This leaves the small child extremely lonely, and for someone so young, dealing with that kind of feeling is not easy, so he acts that way because it is the only way he knows how to express his sadness. So everything will be fine as long as the protagonist can make something that he can also brag about at school. The protagonist finally understands the real situation. The village chief continues saying that Sang-hoo is the only child they have in the village, so everyone takes care of him as if he were family. That is why they have no choice but to ask the protagonist to do a good job to try to cheer him up. Gang-hyun looks at the village chief and thinks that all this time he saw him as just someone troublesome and a bit inconvenient. But the villagers understand Sang-hoo's situation and try to help him in every way. So now he finally understands how they treat each other there. And if it were not for that skirt made of soju bottle caps, he would seem more respectable. That night, inside his house, the protagonist thinks that maybe the village chief is pushing everything onto him. Even though he could make a hamburger very quickly, he reflects that he studied abroad, specifically in the United States, the home of hamburgers. But he has never been to Lotta World, so he may not know exactly what to make. Still, he has spent his entire life dedicated to high-level cooking. What he cannot understand is why the village chief assumes that everyone who lived in Seoul has been to Lotta World. Baek Seol-gi is already tired of the complaints and is waiting for food. Gang-hyun concludes that he has to do it because there is nothing else he can do, and asks the little wolf if he agrees. The protagonist thinks that because of the villagers, that boy has been eating plain radish without any comfort, so he has to do something to make up for it. Baek Seol-gi tries to get food by acting cute, but Gang-hyun tells him to stop, saying he will not get dinner since he already ate everyone's food. Baek Seol-gi looks a bit upset, but the protagonist says that instead there is something he needs him to do. Not long after, Gang-hyun finishes his hamburger and gives it to Baek Seol-gi to taste. The protagonist thinks he will base it on a photo he saw online, but the wagging speed of the little wolf's tail is not that fast. He then recalls the hamburgers he ate while studying abroad. He went to the United States driven only by his passion for cooking, even if it was a bit naive. Still, there was never a time when he was more passionate than back then, and thinking about it now, he truly loves cooking. If his past self saw who he is now, what would he think? He concludes that he cannot stop and asks the white wolf if he can eat more, and judging by the mischievous look on his face, he is more than ready. Gang-hyun stands up, puts on his uniform, grabs his chef's hat, and declares that he has never cooked with restraint. The next morning, early on, the protagonist already has the fire going, preparing a wonderful hamburger. Sang-hoo is still a bit down. His grandmother, Minho, and Minho's wife are all there as well. Minho's wife comments that the smell is always strong when she is around, and that a hamburger is also a rare treat for her. And it seems that the protagonist must be good at everything related to cooking. She asks Sang-hoo if he is happy, since he can finally eat the hamburger he wanted so much. But before he can answer, the protagonist places the hamburger on the table, saying that he has waited a long time, and here is the hamburger he wanted so much. Minho and his wife are impressed, saying it looks delicious, and they tell Sang-hoo to try it right away. As soon as he takes a bite, his mind immediately compares it to the hamburgers he knows. Sang-hoo thinks it is extremely delicious, like a convenience store hamburger, but much better. He tells his grandmother that the hamburger is amazing. She smiles at him and asks if it is really that good, since it must be very satisfying for him to finally eat the hamburger he wanted so much. Sang-hoo lowers his head and takes a deep breath, saying that, in truth, he misses his mother very much. He explains that he thought that if he said he wanted a hamburger from Lotte World, he might be able to go to Seoul where his mother is, and that is why he wanted to eat a hamburger so badly. With tears in his eyes, he apologizes. He says he did not mean to throw a tantrum and feels sorry for putting his grandmother through that. His grandmother wipes his tears and says he must have suffered a lot on his own. She tells him she understands his feelings, so he does not need to be so sad. She adds that he is still very young and must be upset about living with his grandmother, separated from his parents. But Sang-hoo keeps crying and says she is wrong, because he is very happy living with her, and apologizes once again for causing such trouble, saying that he also loves her like a second mother. Gang-hyun is moved by the whole scene and says that soon, not right now, but he plans to go to Seoul and asks if Sang-hoo would like to go with him when the time comes. The grandmother is surprised by the invitation, and Sang-hoo asks if he is telling the truth and if he can really go. Gang-hyeon says that if there is time, they can also stop by Lottie World because he wants to try the hamburger they were talking so much about and asks what Sang-hoo thinks. Sang-hoo accepts the invitation without hesitation, and Minho's wife is also happy, saying that he will finally fulfill his wish. The grandmother asks the protagonist how she could ever repay such a huge favor. Minho's wife asks Sang-hoo if he will take a picture to show her. The protagonist thinks that from now on he should start acting like a spoiled person, since there is no way he is going to a place he was forced to go to. Sang-hoo keeps smiling and calls Gang-hyeon uncle, thanking him once again for doing this for him. The protagonist takes a deep breath and thinks that he will keep his promise, but not now. Sometime later, Gang-hyeon goes to his fridge and realizes he still has plenty of ingredients left over from testing his menu. And since he has come this far, maybe he should finally go on that camping trip he could not do before using those ingredients. He pauses to think, realizing he has never properly gone camping. And once the restaurant opens, he will have even less time, so maybe it is better to go now. Baek Seolgi comes up to him and starts wagging his tail. Suddenly, a strong light appears and the protagonist gets scared because it looks exactly like when he went to the other world before. However, he does not remember ever saying he was going there, since he had just said he was going camping. Already in the forest of the other world, he is sitting in his chair, thinking that not even the convenience store in front of his house is a place he visits that often. Still, he feels a bit happy to be there because it is a very beautiful place. He takes out his equipment and starts setting up his camp. He quickly manages to put up the tent, but it collapses right after. And after a few attempts, he falls to the ground exhausted with the tent finally set up, because it turned out to be harder than he expected. And now he is very hungry. He quickly grabs his ingredients and prepares a stew, but while he is eating, other animals start approaching. He takes some meat and asks if they like eating raw meat, tossing it toward them, but a giant bird snatches it midair and keeps flying. Gang-hyeon throws a bit more meat to the animals and starts enjoying the place because he thought it would be very boring, since he had not imagined even for a second that he could feel satisfied doing absolutely nothing, and this must be what they call relaxing. While thinking about all that, he notices that the white wolf has disappeared again, but he is not worried because when it gets hungry, it will probably come back, since his main concern is figuring out what to eat next. While he is still eating, something is watching him. Gang-hyeon hears a noise in the bush behind him. The protagonist says that the meat is not anything special, but he still set some aside for it, thinking it was the white wolf, but suddenly a hand reaches toward him. Gang-hyeon dodges, and whatever it was slips and falls to the other side. The two stare at each other, and Gang-hyeon realizes that it is not Baek Seolgi. Even though it looks like an animal, it also has a humanoid shape and a face that resembles that of a girl. The protagonist is not sure whether that is really a girl or not, because she has ears and a tail like a cat, and maybe she is half human and half beast, just like in the movies. The beast girl gets ready and attacks again to try to grab the food, but the protagonist dodges once more. Gang-hyeon says that maybe they can settle things peacefully. He notices that she's staring at the food and asks if she is hungry. He places the bowl of food on the ground and asks what she thinks about eating and then leaving. Suspicious, she slowly begins to approach, sniffs the bowl, and her mouth starts watering. She tries a bite, and the protagonist notices that she does not use her hands to eat. However, the pepper in the dish is far too strong for her. Gang-hyeon sees that the kimchi stew is spicy, apologizes, and offers her some water. But shortly after, the girl stops crying and licks her lips, savoring every ingredient. She goes back to the food and starts eating with great pleasure, and apparently she manages to adapt to the taste. Suddenly, Baek Seolgi appears, and the protagonist says that he only ever shows up when it is time to eat, as always. Gang-hyeon asks Baek Seolgi to wait a little because he is going to heat the food again, but Baek Seolgi glances to the side, sees a cat eating his food, and attacks immediately. The protagonist gets worried and shouts at the white wolf, saying that everything was being resolved peacefully, and now he is the one causing trouble. Gang-hyeon picks him up, saying that he already has food, so there is no need to act like that, but the catwoman is also irritated and tries to attack as well. However, the fight between the two stops when a beastman appears holding the girl. He apologizes to the protagonist and leaves. Gang-hyeon watches them and wonders how many different species live there. Sometime later, back on planet Earth, Gang-hyeon is cleaning the floor of his restaurant, because tomorrow will be the big opening day. He says that he knows very well he should be resting a little, but it feels like he is just playing around because now that they decided to open, they need to be ready. Outside, someone passing by notices the storefront. Gang-hyeon reviews everything step by step since the remodeling is done, the ingredients are prepared, and the cleaning will be finished soon, which means the preparations are perfect so he will be able to open tomorrow without any problems. The person outside walks into the restaurant and asks whether the protagonist is already selling anything. Gang-hyeon looks at the person and says that the grand opening is tomorrow, but the person asks if he really is not making anything right now. The protagonist takes a deep breath and tells the person that she can sit wherever she wants. The woman walks over to a table and starts looking around. Shortly after, she asks why the protagonist is bringing all those old things inside instead of throwing them away. She keeps studying the place and remarks that it apparently looks the same as before. Ganghyun asks the elderly woman if she used to come there when it was only a tea house. The old woman asks what they are selling there now. The protagonist says that they basically do not serve Western-style food, but things like pasta and pizza. The woman pulls out a chair and asks if the protagonist is talking about American noodles and asks for some. Ganghyun asks what kind of pasta she wants, but the woman simply tells him to make it however he prefers. The protagonist goes into the kitchen and thinks that this woman may be eating pasta for the first time, and tomato sauce is fairly common, so she should be able to enjoy it. He puts the pasta on to boil and quickly prepares the sauce, mixing all the ingredients while thinking that he will serve his first customer perfectly. A few minutes later, the dish is ready. He serves the food, saying that it is tomato pasta, and asks his customer to enjoy it. He watches closely, thinking that this pasta cannot be bad, because it is the same pasta praised by countless judges, so there is no way it could be bad. The woman tasting it only asks how much it costs, leaving the protagonist a little surprised. The village chief also arrives at the restaurant, saying that the storefront looks wonderful and very attractive, which will help with sales. He opens the door and asks if someone is already inside. The village chief sees the woman and asks Grandma why she is there. Grandma asks what someone would be doing in a restaurant if not eating. The village chief explains that the opening is not until the next day, so how can she already be eating there? But the old woman simply says that she is leaving after finishing everything. The chief remarks that she is very insensitive. The protagonist is staring at the plate on the table, and the village chief notices that there is food left there and asks whether she was too full, because that leftover soup is a waste. Ganghyun is irritated, asking himself what was wrong with his food. He goes over to the corner of the restaurant and isolates himself, completely upset. The village chief tries to understand the situation and asks what is wrong and whether he had some problem preparing for business. Ganghyun explains that it is not that, and in fact, it is not difficult at all. Also, they were closed that day, but the village chief gets a little confused because he has not even opened yet. They walk over to the table and the village chief says that, as he thought, it is because of what Grandma Park left behind. He tries to comfort the protagonist, saying that he is not some winner of a world competition, so there is no way he can satisfy everyone. But that only makes the protagonist even more upset because the truth is that he actually is a celebrity and the biggest winner of world competitions. The village chief keeps telling him not to worry too much about it since he came there to eat anyway. He mentions that his older brother used to come there often, and that catches Ganghyun's attention. The village chief explains that his older brother was that woman's husband, and when that place was only a tea house, he used to go there so often that his legs probably hurt. However, he passed away last year, and since then, Grandma Park has been confined to her house, and also had not done that for quite some time, which shows that she still misses her husband very much. The village chief says that unfortunately the dead are dead, and the living have to keep living. He tells Ganghyun that he is being foolish, because none of that is his fault. Even if she has always been demanding given the circumstances, he does not need to worry about it. Ganghyun asks how he could possibly not worry after hearing all that, because that entire story will only make his head hurt for no reason. Sometime later, he decides to go camping in the other world again to try to forget what happened. He says that thanks to the white wolf being with him, there are no longer any threatening animals like on the first day, so there is no better place to clear his head than there. He thinks that the fact his first pasta was not eaten was shocking, but now that he understands the real situation, all he can feel is sympathy. And even though that is not the dish he is most confident in, next time Grandma visits him, he should prepare Korean food for her instead. He looks up and sees the Catwoman on top of a tree, staring at him. He feels a little annoyed seeing that she is there again. She tries to show how fierce she is, but the protagonist just keeps staring at her without showing any fear. He says that she's always hungry whenever she shows up there. The protagonist starts preparing his things and she becomes curious and slowly approaches. He lights the grill and starts grilling the meat. A little later, he says that the food is ready, but this time the sauce needs to be made a little more carefully. In another pan, he starts melting butter and slowly adds the mushrooms, then a little pepper and salt. Once it turns golden, he adds the cream. As soon as it thickens, he just needs to add the Parmesan cheese, then he tosses in the boiled pasta, and finally adds the steak he grilled earlier, and the creamy steak pasta is complete. The young woman comes closer, though she's still a little cautious. The protagonist says that it is fine if she is cautious, but if she keeps acting like that, Baek Solgi might end up not liking it. She gets ready to eat, but remembers the pepper and becomes a little hesitant, though she eats anyway. As soon as she tastes the first piece of meat, she is enchanted by all that flavor. She starts eating happily and smiles at Ganghyun, showing that she loved the food. The protagonist says that even though they cannot communicate with words, he can tell that she loved the meal. Besides, she looks much better like this than when she ate the spicy food. But the truth is that personally, he does not like that pasta very much. because both the cream and the steak are rich, and the combination is not that good either, and it is closer to fusion pasta than traditional pasta. The beast woman walks up to him and starts rubbing against his leg. Ganghyun is surprised by the change in behavior because last time she attacked fiercely and now she is acting friendly. He pets her head, saying that the food must have tasted incredibly good to her. He thinks that whether it is traditional or not, what matters is that the person eating it should enjoy it. Thinking that, he realizes that food should be adjusted to the customer's taste. He quickly returns home with a few groceries because spring vegetables have a stronger flavor. That is why a cook has to know exactly what he is doing when pairing them. As soon as he finishes cooking, he offers the food to the white wolf, asking him to try a little and say what he thinks. But apparently Baekseolgi is just like him and does not like eating vegetables either. The protagonist stares at him, realizing he's not even going to try, and apparently he will have to do this without his assistant this time. But he thinks that is fine because there is no way it can be difficult since all the ingredients are memorable. He rolls up his sleeves, thinking that he cannot simply rely on his assistant forever, so this time he will try it himself. He puts a sign on the front door apologizing for the inconvenience, but saying that for personal reasons, the grand opening will be postponed by 1 week. The village chief, who had come for the opening, begins to think that if a chef cannot even satisfy his first customer, then how could his mind possibly be ready to open a restaurant? Inside her house, Grandma was sitting alone. The village chief goes there and says that he thought she was finally going out a little after all this time, but apparently she'd already gone back inside. He points out that going out is good because there are many things to do outside, but Grandma remains in a bad mood and asks what he is doing there. He explains that he was just passing by and decided to visit, asking her not to be so cold. With an easygoing smile, he tells the elderly woman that the American noodles she left behind must have been quite a shock. She says that a noodle dish might simply not suit the taste of an elderly person, and asks how that could be so shocking. The village chief says he will be very direct and points out that she has nothing else to do anyway, so maybe she could try going there one more time. She asks why she would need to go again since eating there once was enough. The village chief says that maybe this time the flavor might suit her taste. He asks if it is really so hard to walk through that little door and says that in any case, it is not that far, even if she gets lost on the way. He tells her to just try eating there one last time, and after that she can decide whether it is worth it or not because maybe she will find a reason worth leaving the house for once in a while. He leaves her thinking and goes away. Meanwhile, the protagonist is dedicating himself fully and says that this is what he expected because it is better to have one type of vegetable as the main ingredient centered around seafood. That way, he will not ruin the flavor of the vegetables. But his biggest problem now is how to invite Grandma to come back again. While trying to find a way, he notices that someone has entered because the doorbell rings. As soon as he looks to see who it is, he sees Grandma again. She asks if he is selling anything. The protagonist is surprised to see her, but this time, a little more confident, says yes. She sits at the table and thinks that the chief was probably expecting her to return, since the meal is already ready. But she is not excited because she thought it would probably be that same American noodle dish again, and honestly, that dish did not suit her taste. While she waits, the protagonist approaches with the food, and the aroma alone makes her feel as if she were standing in a field of flowers. She thinks that this time, he made something different. The protagonist serves the dish and thanks her for waiting a little. He presents his new dish, saying that it is wonjuri pasta, a special item on the restaurant's menu. She thinks about the name wonjuri and wonders if they eat that in America too. She takes a look at the plate and sees that it also has bracken and shellfish. She picks up some pasta and puts it in her mouth, wondering whether this will really suit her taste better than last time. As she eats, she thinks of the scent of spring vegetables. She remembers the time she first met her late husband. It was early spring, and they were sitting under a tree full of blossoms. Her husband raises his hands to pluck a flower, saying that they seem to have grown a little more than last year and also become even prettier. He takes a flower and offers it to her, asking if she has a little time and suggesting that they go have some tea together at a tea house. She's surprised, seeing that he was a little bolder than usual. She stops eating and looks at the flowers outside the window. Then she stirs the food again and asks whether that dish is not original. The protagonist says it is not. She asks if he made that dish especially for her. On top of that, she would also like to know why he chose to make things more difficult for himself when he could have simply kept doing what he usually does. Ganghyun says that the reason for all of this is because he wanted to make food that suited her palate. He also says that he cannot stay in the same place forever and remembers what he had been thinking, that he could not rely on Baekseolgi forever, and as a real chef, he should be able to satisfy his first customer on his own. Grandma takes another bite of pasta and keeps eating. The protagonist is surprised and happy to see that she cleaned the entire plate. She looks at him and asks how much the meal cost. He cannot believe she really ate everything, and says that it is fine and that she does not have to pay. But Grandma takes a deep breath and asks what kind of businessman refuses money. She says that she ate a wonderful meal like that, so she should pay the full price, telling him never to undervalue his food. Because of that, she would very much like him to add that dish to the menu since she will come back to eat it again. Ganghyun is happy to see that he was able to make something that pleased her and gave her a reason to keep living. Happy with the result, he returns to his private world. He finally managed to satisfy his first customer, and the restaurant has opened. So now all that remains is the honeymoon. He lets out a sigh and thinks that in any case, if he does not visit that world often, his little assistant will lose her mind. So he thinks it would be very nice to go there every weekend to rest a little. Because of that, this will be a perfect day for him to relax, almost like a day off. But as expected, something comes leaping over him. Rodolfo had been looking for his house and says that he got lost. He looks at the protagonist lying on the ground with everything destroyed. The knight laughs, saying that it has been a long time since they last saw each other, and asks how he has been. The protagonist, with his glasses broken and trembling with anger, asks whether that person has no eyes. Rodolfo sits down and says that nature in that area is quite strong. Ganghyun asks whether he is looking for some fugitive, but Rodolfo says that he is off duty, so he decided to come out for a little stroll. Bexiolgi barks at him, and the knight asks whether the young wolf is also interested in hunting. Realizing that it is the perfect moment, he says that he will repay the favor from last time by feeding the protagonist, and suggests that they go hunting together. Ganghyun wanted to refuse, but said nothing, and ended up being dragged along. Rodolfo looks ahead and says that this is the habitat of the owls. The protagonist asks what he means, and the knight says, "Those pink animals over there." The protagonist says that looking at them, they seem more like a herd of walking cotton candy, and since they are cute, it feels a little wrong to hunt them. Rodolfo says that the protagonist probably thinks their fur looks soft and fluffy, but in truth, it is actually a kind of coarse fur. The protagonist looks a little confused and says they look very cute, but then notices that their bodies are a little different. Rodolfo says he is right, and suddenly the birds reveal hard, muscular physiques. Ganghyun gets scared and asks if they are really going to hunt those things. The knight and the white wolf dash off to hunt, saying that this is a great chance, since two of them are fighting and getting tired. He tells the protagonist to stay a little farther back and support from the rear. But the protagonist has no idea what to do, since nobody gave him any instructions on how to shoot a bow. If he knew how to use one, he could have been a national representative. He tries to calm himself so he will not be the only one doing nothing. He slowly pulls the string, aims at his target, and then fires. But the arrow nearly hits Bexiolgi, who gets startled. Ganghyun can only apologize for what happened. Sometime later at the beginning of the night, Rodolfo says that this is great and the food is almost ready, asking whether the protagonist can handle it since he looks like a newborn deer. Ganghyun, with his hand trembling, says that he can endure a little more than that. The knight smiles and says of course, but the protagonist asks whether that can really be called a dish, and that it would be rude to hold back there, so he has to endure it. The food is finally ready, and Rodolfo hands it to the protagonist, asking him to try it. But the knight notices that the little wolf is not there and asks if he went off wandering. The protagonist thinks that his companion is always a runaway. Still suspicious, he looks at the meat, tries a piece, and is astonished, because even without his taste buds, he can tell that it is not very good. The knight laughs and says it is very simple, adding that he will have to show his skills once again after all this time. Ganghyun realizes that and gets to his feet. However, he cannot taste anything, and cooking a kind of meat he has never seen before may be impossible, which makes him wonder whether he is really prepared for this. Still, he pushes that doubt aside and thinks that he has already proven countless times that he is always capable of doing his best. He throws his coat onto the ground, saying that he already told him he is a chef, and because of that, he is going to cook now. The protagonist places the meat on the table because he had tried to remove the gamey smell by boiling it in water. But the truth is that it takes half a day, so he does not think he has enough time. So the most advisable thing is to remove the gamey smell with dark beer. He pours the beer into the pot, and Rodolfo is impressed, asking if that is dark beer, because it is something precious. The protagonist says that is a little unsettling and tells him to step back and start preparing the campfire. He pours half dark beer and half water into the pot. Then he needs to add onion, pepper, sugar, and salt and cook it for an hour. Bexiolgi returns at just the right moment, and the protagonist says it is almost time to take it out and asks for help. He looks into the pot to see how it is doing, and just the smell alone makes both of them go delirious. Rodolfo asks if it is ready already, but the protagonist says not yet because he still needs to roast the meat a little. Normally, he would put it in the oven, but that would also be a little difficult to do there. So he grabs his skewers and places them around the campfire. A few minutes later, he says that now it is ready to eat, it only needs to be sliced. As soon as he cuts and serves it, he says that the leftover owl roast is complete. Rodolfo holds the plate of meat in his hand and thinks the smell is incredibly delicious, wondering if that really is owl. On top of that, he thinks he knows exactly what the protagonist is thinking. And in truth, even the most renowned chefs in the capital would throw in the towel and give up on all of this. The protagonist looks at him and thinks that he probably knows the outcome, but is trying to provoke him. The knight gets ready to taste it, thinking there is no chance it could be good, but the moment he takes a bite, he feels something incredibly intense and asks what is happening because the skin is crispy like a biscuit. At the same time, the original rubbery texture remains subtly, which makes the texture perfect. On top of that, the inside of that meat is soft and moist, making him wonder whether this is really the owl meat he knows. He keeps eating, but thinks the flavor is truly incredible, though something is missing, and it must be something to satisfy that craving. He shouts for the protagonist to bring some drink. He drinks a little of the dark beer and right after that eats some more meat. He shouts, saying that this is a perfect snack for drinking, and wonders how the protagonist can make such a perfect dish, because if he knew how to make that, he would never get tired of eating owl every day. The protagonist is not very satisfied and says that, in fact, the food did not turn out bad, but he could have removed the gamey smell better. So maybe he should have spent a little more time on it, but Baek loved the food too. The protagonist keeps thinking over everything he did and points out that maybe the boiling time was not enough. So perhaps next time he should bring bay leaves with him. Rodolfo cannot believe it because the protagonist has so many complaints after making a perfect dish. And with that level of skill, he could easily become a royal chef in the capital. That makes him wonder whether the protagonist is sure he is not hiding his true identity. He decides to let it go and keeps enjoying the food. The knight says he had intended to feed the protagonist, but in the end, the protagonist cooked everything, and he feels a little embarrassed to say it, but the truth is that he does not believe a recipe like that should even exist. Gang Hyeon feels happy, saying that it is very good to know the food pleased his friend. Rodolfo says that after tasting that food, he probably will not be able to go back to the original owl dish. Because of that, he would really like to know whether the protagonist would allow him to use that recipe in the future. Gang Hyeon says that is fine because it was not a big deal. The knight asks what that means and says that he knows a chef friend and wonders how much such a recipe would be worth. He points out that the protagonist's cooking is excellent and asks him not to underestimate himself. Gang Hyeon becomes even happier because he has been hearing that a lot lately and he agrees and thanks him for the advice. Rodolfo asks the protagonist to tell him what precious thing he has, saying that he should repay him with something valuable and says that he will teach him swordsmanship. The protagonist is not sure what to say and asks what he is talking about. The knight repeats that he is going to teach the protagonist swordsmanship. He adds that before leaving, he could die in that rural area and he used to be quite famous in the royal capital, so his swordsmanship is more than enough as a form of payment. The protagonist tries to refuse, but Rodolfo starts laughing, saying that many people in that territory would kill for the chance to learn swordsmanship from him. Gang Hyeon says that he should teach those people instead of trying to teach him. The knight says that, unfortunately, he has not found anyone he likes who is worthy of carrying on his legacy. Therefore, the protagonist does not need to feel burdened, and if it happens that they meet again from time to time, then he will teach him swordsmanship, and the protagonist can prepare some beer and snacks for them after practice. Gang Hyeon thinks the knight's intention is very transparent, because he is probably doing this because he feels a little uncomfortable simply accepting things without giving anything in return. The knight keeps getting excited about the idea. The protagonist thinks he does not really care about it, but if he refuses, Rodolfo might end up feeling uncomfortable because apparently repaying a favor is very important to him. So maybe he can accept the offer as a form of exercise since he does not really know how to use heavy weapons. He looks up at the sky, relaxing, and notices that it is beautiful, but the truth is that the protagonist did not know the consequences of that choice at the time. 1 week after opening the shop, many villagers visited over the past few days. It had only been a few days, but he had already expected that because he knew there would not be many customers, so he did not expect a full house often. On top of that, Baek seems a little bored since he's only watching TV. He walks over and asks why he is staring at the TV so intensely. The TV program is about specialty goods and local products. He starts thinking about the name of the program because he had definitely heard it somewhere before. Somewhere else, a friend of the protagonist asks if the work is administrative. The women presenting the show ask him whether he does not find it very tiring since he is the manager. He says they did very well, but the truth is that he thinks on-site work is very tiring, and his office work was a little more comfortable. He looks at his schedule and realizes that after the end of that show, he has no more appointments, and, coincidentally, it is close to where the protagonist is living. He calls Gang Hyeon and asks if he is still alive, wondering whether he can come eat later, since he is nearby and can arrive soon. He points out that the business is not doing well anyway, and asks why he would eat somewhere else when he has a famous chef friend nearby. He says he is going alone because he needs to drive, so he will not drink. But the 4 girls hear the phrase chef in Hanam-dong and immediately begin making a plan. He heads to his car and tells his assistant to take good care of those girls. On top of that, he tells the 4 of them to behave properly. They laugh and ask when they have ever failed to listen to him. He decides to ignore them and gets into the car, saying that he will see them tomorrow. As soon as he leaves, his assistant asks whether they should go back to the lodging, but they say they should follow the manager. The assistant tries to understand the situation, but they tell him to hurry up before they lose sight of him. The assistant tries to refuse, saying that the manager told them not to do anything off route. The blonde young woman smiles at him and says that he already knows forgiveness is easier than permission. Meanwhile, the protagonist is cleaning the floor of his restaurant, saying that his friend is very reckless because how can he announce that he is coming in the middle of the day? What would happen if he were busy? Though, in truth, he is not busy. He takes a deep breath and says that his friend should be arriving soon, so he needs to prepare dinner. Suddenly, someone opens the door and the protagonist thinks that at least he is wearing men's clothes. One of the protagonist's friends is completely irritated, telling his assistant that there are only 2 cars in that small town, his and the assistant's, so how could he not know he was being followed? The assistant simply apologizes. The protagonist's friend looks at him and apologizes, but says they have a few guests. The girls look at Ganghyun and introduce themselves. They try to pet Baekseolgi, but he simply ignores all of them and walks away. The manager seats all 4 of them at the same table and says that, apparently, everyone has gotten bolder without him noticing, and asks whether they considered the consequences of their actions. However, no one says anything, and he gets irritated, asking if anyone can answer him. They simply apologize. He tells them to go back immediately. The protagonist, who had been watching, says that he understands the essence of the situation there, not to mention that the assistant looks a little pitiful. He steps into the conversation and says that since they are all already there, it would be better to give them a meal since it is dinner time. His friend asks if that is really okay, but the truth is that he is surprised to see the protagonist simply brush off such an unexpected situation. And normally, those girls should have been throwing a fit by now. Ganghyun asks if there is anything they would like to eat. His friend thinks he had certainly assumed the protagonist would have lost his mind after starting to live in such an isolated countryside place. But apparently he has not changed that much. On top of that, he never imagined he would have a pet dog. Ganghyun goes into the kitchen and starts wondering what those girls would like to eat. But even if he does not know each one's taste very well, he still wants to give them something truly delicious. However, he does not know exactly what ingredients he still has. He opens the refrigerator and finds some cherry tomatoes and thinks maybe they will work. Since they are light and easy to eat, he starts preparing the meal, thinking it is something girls would enjoy, with good nutrition and excellent flavor. After preparing everything, he returns to the table and thanks them for waiting. All 4 of them are impressed. The protagonist presents the dishes, saying that it is tomato pasta and filet salad. They are impressed by how the food looks, but decide to eat first and then say what they think. The blonde becomes incredibly happy because the tomato pasta is amazing. She says that she usually only eats rosé or cream pasta, but that tomato sauce pasta is delicious. The short-haired woman says that the salad has tender meat and fresh vegetables, but she does not know what that thing that looks like dressing is, and asks if he sells it separately. Ganghyun explains that he made it lightly on purpose and asks her to try it. His friend says that he will not say anything while he is eating. The woman in pink starts crying, saying that she lived long enough to find food like that under the sun. The purple-haired one is trembling, saying that the food is so delicious it even makes her a little angry. Her friends tell her to enjoy it instead of getting angry, since they do not know when they will be able to eat a feast like that again. Ganghyun asks his friend if he is really starving those girls. He says that it really is easy to get the wrong idea. The protagonist tells his friend that he should eat too, because he made vongole for him so he could eat as much as he wants, since he still has to drive back to Seoul. The protagonist's friend does not understand what is happening there because he really has changed since he is being thoughtful. He asks Ganghyun how much longer he has to live, but the protagonist gets a little confused and asks whether he really believes he has a terminal illness. After dinner is over, everyone gives thanks, and the 4 girls say that it was truly delicious and on a completely different level from the food they usually get delivered. Ganghyun smiles and says that next time he will make something even more delicious. They cannot believe that he can make something even better. The blonde shouts that she will definitely come back, calling the protagonist chef. He is surprised, and inside the car the girls continue thanking him, saying that both his cooking and his looks are even better in person, and that they will come visit him again. Ganghyun asks his friend when it was that they recognized him. His friend explains that whenever they are hungry, they look up his cooking videos. It would be strange if they did not recognize him. He says goodbye, saying that he needs to go. Ganghyun asks him to come a little earlier next time. Kanghyun asks if the healing is going well. Ganghyun smiles and says that it is going well. The next morning, the protagonist is riding a bicycle with Baekseolgi. He thinks that the supermarket where he bought vegetables last time is the closest one, so he needs to go to the next town to buy things. A little later, he arrives at the supermarket saying that if there are vegetables there, he will need to get plenty. He opens the door and a woman greets him. He is surprised. Since grandma was there last time, maybe this is the daughter-in-law. The woman asks what he is looking for. Ganghyun tells her it is fine because he will look around himself. He thinks that unfortunately there is no wandery there, and grandma only ever asked for that pasta. He asks the woman if that is all the namul she has. She says yes. He thinks that maybe he will need to go to the next town. He says goodbye to her, saying that he will come back next time. But suddenly he hears someone shouting for the other to go away and realizes that a fight is breaking out between two children. The girl says that she's not playing anymore and tells him to let go because he is always showing off. The boy gets irritated and shouts that she does not even look like them, telling her to go back to her country. The girl becomes upset when she hears that. The protagonist steps in, telling both of them to stop immediately, and scolds the boy, saying that he cannot say things like that, asking if he is sure he will not regret those actions in the future. The supermarket woman comes outside to see what is happening and sees Mi-young in the middle of the commotion. The girl, crying, calls for her mother, and Gang-hyun is surprised by that. Mi-young runs to her mother, who asks what is wrong and whether she is okay. The protagonist thinks that her mother is there, which means the situation should be under control for now. The boy pulls his hand free from the protagonist and runs away. The woman bows and thanks the protagonist for helping her daughter. He's a little surprised and says it was nothing, but she insists on thanking him. He takes a deep breath and asks whether Mi-young is okay. Her mother says yes, and that Mi-young is probably sleeping now. The mother becomes upset and feels guilty about everything, saying that it is all her fault. Gang-hyun gets a little confused and asks what she means because it was just children fighting, so none of it is her fault. The woman introduces herself, saying that her name is Yoon, she is from Vietnam, and that maybe Mi-young is being bullied because of her. The protagonist thinks that this is not something he can easily comfort her about. The scene he saw earlier passes through his mind, leaving him speechless, and it is not something he can speak about carelessly. Yoon looks at the protagonist and says that actually she knows who he is, because she heard that he has a restaurant in Upper Village, and asks whether he could teach her how to cook. He gets a little confused by the question, and she explains that unfortunately, she only knows how to cook Vietnamese food. But soon they will have Mi-young's birthday party and the children will be coming, so she wants to make Korean food so that they can eat normally. Sometime later, sitting in the chair at his table, the protagonist is deep in thought, because that woman's eyes looked so desperate that he could not refuse. She wanted to learn Korean food in a great hurry, and that must be because she is worried that her daughter may be teased, and that is very frustrating for a mother. Bak Seol-gi runs over to his owner with a can in his mouth. That can is premium caviar, very expensive. Gang-hyun asks where he found that and explains that it will not taste good if he eats it like that, but he decides to let it go and opens it, saying that he will not need that, because honestly, he can only help when it suits him, since it is not advisable to ask for help only when there is a problem. But he thinks he needs to do something, because what is the point of having neighbors if they cannot help each other in times of need? He grabs a few things because he also knows the villagers, so there is an adult he can ask about those kinds of things. It is the pregnant woman named Sujin. She is surprised since it is rare for the protagonist to visit someone. He explains that there is something he would like to discuss with her. Sujin asks him to come in, and the protagonist is surprised to see the village chief there. He sits down among everyone and starts explaining the situation, saying that he is currently thinking about dishes suitable for a birthday party. Sujin says that she also knows the supermarket woman because she has seen Mi-young playing with her several times. Gang-hyun is surprised and asks if they are in the same school because it is incredible that they can be friends. Minho explains that they really do go to the same school because all the children in that area attend the same school since there is only one school there. And even if they are friends, they probably still have different ideas. Since there are fewer than 20 students in the entire school, different grades are mixed together in each class. The protagonist understands that it is a combined class since there are not many students. Sujin places her hand on her belly, saying that she can understand how Yoon feels seeing something like that happen to her daughter, because she would have done the same thing for her own child. The protagonist understands that all of this is for the sake of the children, and what is right for a child is the wish that they do not get hurt. So that must be the heart of a parent. He says that the only solution is to teach dishes that can be learned quickly. The village chief says that what he means is the opposite, because she is a Vietnamese mother and should cook Vietnamese food. The protagonist is completely confused, saying that this is wrong because the reason she wants to cook Korean food is the village chief cuts him off, saying that Mi-young will only become even more depressed. Children that age are more adaptable, but they do not know how to accept things as they are, and that is why adults need to teach them that being different is not wrong. The village chief asks the protagonist to help because words will never be as effective as a single taste, since that way they will understand better. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Yoon is feeling depressed and confused, asking herself if this is really the right path because all of this is for the children, but what she knows how to make is very different from Korean food, and that makes her wonder whether the children will really like that food. The protagonist approaches and says that this should be good for rice noodles. They just need to remove the onions from the broth because children usually do not like those things very much. He says that the Vietnamese spring rolls she made earlier are delicious and common when stir-fried, but for children they may be a little hard to eat, since they can be picky about that too. So maybe it would be better to replace them with fried spring rolls. The texture is crispy, so children might like them a little more. He points out that if she presents them as Vietnamese dumplings, they may become more interested. Yoon is impressed by the skills and knowledge the protagonist is showing. That gives her a little more confidence, thinking that if he helps her, then everything may turn out fine. She begins cooking, preparing all the ingredients, and before long the food is ready. She places the food on the table, saying that this is the final dish and that it is called bun cha. The protagonist gets ready to taste it, thinking that although this dish is not as famous as pho, it is indispensable in Vietnamese cuisine. It is a dish where you dip noodles, vegetables, and meat into nuoc mam sauce. He tries some, thinking that the aroma is refreshing and the food is fun to eat, and with that combination, the children may also enjoy it. After tasting a little, he says that it seems like a good main dish. He asks if she could bring him a glass of water. As soon as she leaves, he calls Bexiolgi and asks him to try it. The white wolf tastes the food and eats as if it is delicious. Suddenly, his tail starts moving so fast that it slaps the protagonist in the face. Gang Hyeon thinks that this is the fastest it has wagged all day, and for such a reaction to come from his demanding tester, Yoon really is a master of buncha. She comes back and hands him the water, but Gang Hyeon is covered in white wolf fur. He tells her that children are going to eat it, so they need to remove the chili from the sauce. On top of that, they also need to minimize the cilantro as much as possible. He also says that they should use only pork for the meatballs because they are a little dry, so they need to mix the meat in a ratio of 2:1. She agrees. And Gang Hyeon explains that her food is truly delicious, and that if she makes it that way, then the children will be able to eat it with great pleasure. She feels happy and thanks him for the help and the time he spent there. Outside, the protagonist lets out a sigh of relief, thinking that it is really good to know that she cooks so well. On top of that, she is also a good student, easy to teach, and willing to accept criticism and advice. And because of that, there should be no problems on the birthday itself. Mi-young calls out to the protagonist. He turns around and asks if something happened. She hands him a piece of paper, telling him to take it. Gang Hyeon carefully takes the paper in his hand and asks if she made it herself. With a smile on her face, she says yes, and tells him that he cannot come without it. On top of that, on her birthday, she would also really like him to come with it. But then her smile fades. She lowers her gaze and looks sad, saying that anyway, she does not think many children will show up at her birthday. Gang Hyeon asks why. She says that Cheolmin is friends with everyone and has many friends. The protagonist realizes that the name of the boy she had fought with last time is Cheolmin. She continues saying that she is sure none of them will come. Gang Hyeon has no answer for that, but time passes, and on the day of the birthday party, the house is still empty, and Mi-young is sad, asking if Uncle Chef is really going to show up, and whether Sang-hoo will come too. She is also worried about whether Young will come, and Jong-hun had said he would come too. She goes to the door and asks if it is possible that no one will come at all. Yoon calls her daughter so she can see how her mother looks, and as soon as the little girl looks at her mother, she becomes happy to see that she looks beautiful. She tells her mother that she is really beautiful and asks where she got that dress. Yoon explains that it is a traditional dress from her country and asks if she would like to try it. Her daughter becomes enchanted by the clothes from her mother's country and says yes. Yoon gives her some clothes to try on, and Mi-young feels very good in them. Suddenly, they hear someone knocking on the door. Yoon tells her daughter that her friends must be arriving and asks her to open the door. She goes to the door, thanking God that they have come. She opens the door happily, asking who it is, but when she sees, she is surprised. Cheolmin is standing at her door and neither of them knows what to do. She feels a little uncomfortable and asks why he is there since she did not invite him, and tells him to go away. She gets ready to close the door, but Cheolmin shouts an apology. He explains that he truly did not mean what he said last time because he was very angry and ended up saying something really cruel. So he admits that he was completely wrong. He starts crying, begging for her forgiveness, saying that he is sorry for making her cry like that. She says nothing, and he keeps insisting, saying that he really wanted to apologize to her, which is why he came. She says that even so, he still cannot come in and pulls out an invitation, shouting that he does not have an invitation to that birthday party. Cheolmin becomes upset, thinking that maybe what he did can no longer be forgiven, but Mi-young hands the invitation to him, saying that she accepts his apology and will let him come in this time. Cheolmin stops crying and looks at her while thanking her for that. She also becomes happy with the situation and starts smiling. Suddenly, the children who had been hiding and watching ask if they already made up and whether they can come in now. Cheolmin becomes embarrassed, and the children say that he should not do that again next time because the words he said last time went too far. Several children appear smiling and cheering, saying that they already have the invitations and also brought a nice birthday present. All of them shout happy birthday to her. Mi-young finally feels loved and at home. With everything resolved, they go inside and the food is served. The children are a little surprised, asking what kind of food that is because they have never seen it before. The protagonist, who is also there, is surprised to see so many people because apparently the entire school decided to show up. The children ask what that food is, what kind of noodles those are, and whether they're special. They also want to know how to eat it. Yoon goes over to them and explains that it is called bun cha and that it tastes delicious when they dip it in the sauce. The children decide to try it and are enchanted by the wonderful flavor of the food. They say they have never eaten anything like that before because the taste is sweet, sour, and delicious. They keep trying every dish on the table, saying it is so good that when they grow up, they're going to marry that little dumpling. One of the boys asks Mi-young what kind of dress she is wearing because he has never seen one like that before. Mi-young stands on top of her chair to show off her clothes and explains that it is a traditional dress from her mother's country. The children ask what country her mother is from. Mi-young says that all those dishes are Vietnamese, which means that all the food they are eating is from Vietnam. The children ask if she came there by airplane because they are jealous since they have never ridden one before. The child with glasses says that the Vietnamese dress is beautiful, so beautiful that she wants to marry it when she grows up. Mi-young runs over to her mother, telling her to show her dress too, because she wants to show how their clothes match. Yoon gets a little worried about that. The protagonist steps in, saying that the cooking is almost done so she can go without him. Mi-young excitedly pulls her mother along with a smile on her face. Yoon, seeing that her daughter is finally happy, feels like a good mother again. The children are impressed by her mother's dress, saying that it is real and that it is such a beautiful matching outfit and that now she finally looks happy. Meanwhile, in another world, in the Beastmen tribe, the leader was asking whether their daughter had run away again. The Beastman from before says yes and explains that even though her fighting spirit is surprisingly strong, it seems she escaped while everything was in chaos. The leader asks if she went to see that same human again, and her subordinate says yes. She grows curious and asks who that human is, saying they should bring him to the sacred wolf. On top of that, he managed to capture her daughter's heart, so she would like to invite him. The subordinate is a little surprised to hear this request because bringing a human to the village is a bit complicated. The leader asks if it is forbidden, because she hopes no idiot starts picking a fight with her guest. Besides, her daughter owes that human a debt, so as her mother, she should at least see his face. Elsewhere, in the middle of the forest, Ganghyun was a little annoyed with Baekseolgi, telling him to be quiet. The white wolf was barking a lot at the shrimp Ganghyun had brought, but the protagonist could not understand it since he picks fights with birds much bigger than he is, but is being cautious around tiny dead animals. Ganghyun thinks maybe he is acting like that because there is no sea nearby and he might not know that animal. The protagonist points out that this really is a shame since shrimp are delicious. He tries to explain that they can be a little scary at first, but the little wolf keeps glaring angrily at the shrimp. Ganghyun cannot understand it. The things the wolf normally hunts are horrible. The protagonist asks Baekseolgi what standards he uses for these things. Even so, nothing helps, and the little wolf keeps barking. Ganghyun thinks the only way to solve this is to show his companion the true flavor of shrimp. He grabs one and begins removing the antennae and legs along with the innards. Then he spreads coarse salt in the pan, carefully places the shrimp inside and covers it with a lid to cook. He explains that he had originally planned to give the shrimp to Rodolfo, but he still has plenty left. Baekseolgi keeps staring suspiciously at the pot, and his owner says that now all they need to do is wait a little. While they are waiting for the food, the little beast girl appears. The protagonist notices that she is always hungry. A few minutes later, he removes the pot from the heat and lifts the lid. Using a glove, he picks up the shrimp, starts peeling them, and serves them to the two of them. The wolf and the little beast try them, and both feel as if they are being swept up in a great ocean wave, tasting tender and juicy meat with a wonderful aroma. Ganghyun asks what they think, saying that this is the taste of the sea. The two keep eating everything, and the protagonist is happy that they both liked it. The little beast suddenly looks to the side in fear and sees her guardian standing there, calling for her. Mona bristles in fear and runs behind Ganghyun. The beastman says that she ran away again without permission. The protagonist thinks it is the same man who appeared last time to take her back. He tries to calm the situation, telling the beastman to wait until she finishes eating since she seems hungry. He points out that he is not feeding her anything strange or dangerous. The beastman takes a deep breath and says that he has no business dealing with humans. Ganghyun gets confused and asks why. The man steps closer and tells the protagonist to come with him. That frightens Ganghyun since he has no idea what might happen there. He asks where they are going, and the beastman explains that the village chief is inviting him for a visit. The protagonist asks who the chief is, and he explains that it is Mona's mother. The protagonist is surprised by that and thinks maybe they are trying to contact him to interrogate him about what happened with their daughter. That makes him think that if he goes without knowing what is really happening, something bad might end up happening to him. He tries to get out of the situation, saying that the day is a little difficult for him. The beastman cuts him off and shows him an artifact, explaining that it is a whistle used by warriors, and asks him to blow it when he has free time. That gesture leaves the protagonist a little confused because they are being more considerate than he expected. So maybe it really is just an invitation. He asks the beastman why the village chief invited him. The beastman explains that she wants to know who the human is that made her daughter leave. Ganghyun thinks that this is probably a complaint from the parents. He starts trembling in fear, thinking that he does not mind showing a little about himself. The beastman turns away, saying that his business is done, but the protagonist asks him to wait. A little later, back in the village, the beastman looks inside the bag the protagonist had handed him, which is full of shrimp. Hyun says he felt honored, and since the man came all the way there, he could not just let him go back empty-handed. He points out that those things may look a little strange, but they are delicious. The beastman enters one of the huts, and his tail starts wagging. He says that it really is not bad. Meanwhile, the protagonist is deep in thought, wondering whether he should accept the invitation or not. Since the white wolf is calm, Mona is probably not a bad person. And even though he is very curious to see what that village is like, he still hesitates to go without knowing more about what it all means. And if only he could hear from someone he could ask about these things, it would be easier. Suddenly, Rodolfo appears and greets him. The protagonist is happy to see him, saying that he came at the perfect time because he needs help. As soon as he explains the situation, Rodolfo is surprised and asks if he really received a direct invitation to the Beastman village, because that is unbelievable. Hyun asks if that invitation is really that rare. Rodolfo explains that interaction between humans and beastmen ended a long time ago, and he has never seen a beastman invite a human into their village. On top of that, he looks to the side and sees Mona and thinks that even the daughter of a beast is staying beside the protagonist, even though the man himself does not seem to realize how significant that is. After thinking for a moment, the warrior tells the protagonist that he can go without worry because he truly believes the beastman will not do anything to harm him. Hyun gets to his feet and says that hearing that is a huge relief and decides he will accept the invitation another time because right now he has something delicious to offer. He begins preparing the ingredients, and the dish is ready in no time, leaving the three of them salivating. He asks Rodolfo to try the butter-grilled shrimp. He picks up one shrimp and breaks it in half, explaining that they can simply peel it that way and then eat it. Rodolfo holds a shrimp in his hand, thinking that the smell is really curious, which makes him wonder what kind of face it has. However, what he would most like to know is where the protagonist gets these ingredients, because he is a very mysterious young man. He decides to taste it, and the moment he eats it, he is amazed. The protagonist's cooking skills are definitely reliable, and that is a flavor he has never experienced before. The meat is savory and a little fatty, but also spicy, and most importantly, the texture is addictive. And that food is so good that he could eat an entire bowl without the slightest problem. Baek Seolgi liked it so much that he was stealing Mona's food and not letting her eat. The warrior ends up eating the whole shrimp, because peeling it is becoming a little annoying. The protagonist is surprised to see that he is eating it that way. The three of them give thanks, and Rodolfo says that this is another delicacy made by Hyun. The protagonist worries about them and asks them to be careful because the shells can be a little sharp. Sometime later, all the shrimp have been devoured. Mona and Baek Seolgi cannot even stand up anymore. Rodolfo says that everything was delicious again, and the protagonist says it is a relief to hear that. The warrior walks over to the protagonist and says that he cannot teach carelessly. Hyun gets confused, wondering what he is talking about. Rodolfo explains that this is the sword training they are going to do. The protagonist remembers that they had promised this before. The warrior laughs, telling the protagonist not to be so worried about basic and light training. After several hours, the day is already coming to an end, and the protagonist is completely exhausted. Rodolfo tells him that if his stamina is really that low, then he still has a long way to go before becoming a stronger warrior. But the protagonist can barely answer. The warrior keeps explaining that for him to be that tired after running for only 4 hours means that his lower body is very weak. Baek Seolgi starts licking the protagonist's ankle. He is surprised, wondering if it is just his imagination or if the place the white wolf was licking actually feels a little better. He starts to relax, saying that it feels very good, as if some kind of balm had been applied. Mona also starts licking his other foot, and he is surprised to see that she can do it too. He stands up and thanks both of them, saying that he will do his best. Rodolfo says that even though the protagonist became so exhausted, his perseverance and the fact that he did not give up halfway are something admirable. He picks up a wooden sword and tosses it to the protagonist, saying that it is his gift. He explains that it is lighter than a real sword, but still good enough for training. He had originally made it for his daughter, but now the protagonist can use it. Hyun is surprised and says that if that is the case, he cannot accept a gift that was meant for his own daughter. The warrior lets out a sigh and says that unfortunately his daughter is afraid of swords, and the protagonist is surprised to hear that. Rodolfo keeps speaking enthusiastically, telling him not to worry because he will train his daughter until she can face anything. On top of that, he says that as long as he helps the protagonist, he too can become the strongest warrior. Hyun agrees, but thinks that he will probably have terrible muscle pain for a while. During the night, he returns home and starts cooking. While making pasta, he thinks about Rodolfo's words when he said that he was too weak, and now, after a long time, he is craving something a little healthier. He serves the pasta to the little wolf and is surprised to see how happy he is, because he had used only a little bacon and garlic, and even so, it still turned out edible. But what matters most is that his companion likes the food he makes. If that is fine, then nothing else matters. The moment he takes a bite, his whole body freezes. He slams the chopsticks onto the table and quickly grabs several ingredients from this refrigerator, placing them on top of the table. He stands there for a moment and says that he can finally taste food again. Even though he still has not fully recovered, he can at least taste a little. He thinks that if he had stayed in Seoul, he might have stopped cooking entirely, and when he first came there, he had been completely desperate and depressed. He crouches down thinking that now he can finally cook whatever he wants, and as much as he wants again. He calls his companion over and thanks him, saying that he is very happy he made the difficult decision to come there. Outside, the village chief is walking alone, thinking that he cannot keep doing this anymore because he has work the next day and is very tired. But all of that happened because Mr. Kim was there. Besides, next time he should bring some alcohol back with him. While walking, he notices that all the restaurant lights are on and wonders what the young chef is doing awake so late at night. Inside, the protagonist is cooking nonstop, doing what he knows best. A little later, he plates the dish and says that it has been a long time since he made his signature dish. He picks up a bite, puts it in his mouth, and eats slowly. He removes his chef's hat, saying that he can finally taste the acidity again. However, he still cannot fully taste all the flavor or richness of his dish. But even so, he is happy, because this is already a good start. Bexiolgi starts barking at him and shows how happy he is. The protagonist ends up feeling happy too, saying that a partial success can still be considered a success. He says that it is time to begin and that he is going to do exactly that, telling his companion to look forward to it because he won his first competition with that dish. The next morning, someone is banging hard on the door, calling for the protagonist and asking if he is inside. Gang Hyeon gets up, but he can barely move because he is suffering from intense muscle pain and terrible indigestion after overeating the day before. He opens the door looking completely defeated and says that he did not sleep very well, asking the village chief to make a little less noise. But the village chief keeps shouting, asking if the protagonist is really that sleepy, and he confirms that he is, saying that he slept terribly. Because of that, he is still very tired and maybe can see him later. The village chief refuses, saying that now is not the time because he is in a hurry, and he shoves Ganghyun into the car. The little wolf, who is also half asleep, is left behind without understanding anything. They rush to the hospital, and the protagonist asks if Sujin really went into labor. The village chief says yes, and that he had to rush out without even having cured his hangover. As soon as they enter the hospital, several people outside start asking whether it was a boy or a girl, whether she was okay, and commenting that her water had broken all of a sudden. All of those questions only make Minho even more nervous about the situation. Grandma appears and brings order to the chaos, asking what they all think they are doing there since they are bothering both the workers and the baby's father, and tells them to get out because they are causing too much commotion. The village chief agrees with her, saying that it is not good to have so many people gathered there. He smiles and says that he is the village chief, so he will take responsibility for that area and do everything he can to make sure the delivery goes well, so they do not need to worry. But Grandma asks what he is talking about and says that he needs to leave too, and starts dragging him outside. The protagonist looks at the whole situation and thinks it would probably be easier for Minho if he were not there either. But Grandma tells the protagonist that he should stay, because it is good for the child's father to have a friend like him there. Ganghyun feels a little confused, thinking that is strange, because maybe it would be better if the village chief were in his place, since he has never been through a situation like that and has no idea what to do. Minho thanks the protagonist for staying with him. Ganghyun says it is nothing, because he is just standing there with a friend. Minho points out that just having him standing by his side is enough, because he is excited, but also very worried and very nervous about the whole situation. The protagonist places a hand on his friend's shoulder, thinking that the two of them are basically the same age, and says that everything will be okay. He thinks that this is also the first time Minho has ever gone through something like this. Minho looks at Ganghyun and notices that he also seems a little scared, but that is actually comforting, and it helps him calm down a little. He thanks the protagonist for his companionship. Sometime later outside, the news arrives. A beautiful baby girl has just been born. The villagers are happy to find out that it is a girl and that she was born healthy. They say that it has been a very long time since they last had a baby, and that they need to hold a celebration, because they cannot let a day like that pass without one. The village chief asks how Minho is doing. The protagonist says that he is together with his wife, because she is crying a lot from happiness. Apparently, everyone in that place really does love a celebration. The village chief explains that in villages like that, they build solidarity through parties. The protagonist notices that the village chief just called that place a village, and says that he has also been invited to another village. He asks whether, in cases like that, it is better to go accompanied. The village chief gets worried and asks if another village has its eye on him, and wonders what kind of shameless village is trying to steal a young man under 39. The protagonist explains the situation and says that it was only an invitation to visit the place. The village chief relaxes a little and says that if it is for gifting a village, alcohol is one of the best options, or maybe he could also offer a local specialty. Ganghyun likes the idea of a local specialty and asks the village chief if that village has any local specialty. The chief says yes and points out that it is Korean beef, but the protagonist stares at him and says that is Pyeongchang's local specialty. They keep talking and come to the conclusion that offering alcohol as a gift is a very good idea. Sometime later, already in the other world, the protagonist takes out the artifact the Beastman had given him. But before playing it, he says that he is getting a little nervous for no reason. He steels himself and blows into the artifact, and the sound echoes throughout the forest. After blowing it for a few seconds, he takes a deep breath and says that it is harder than he thought, but the big question is whether they can really hear it and show up. Suddenly, the Beastman and Mona appear. The Beastman says that it seems the protagonist is ready. He grabs Ganghyun by the shoulder and says that they need to leave immediately. The protagonist gets scared, asks him to wait, and wonders if they are really going like that, but the Beastman just leaps as if he were flying. Sometime later, the Beastman lets the protagonist down and he immediately starts vomiting. He remarks that humans are getting far too weak these days, especially in the lower body. Ganghyun remembers that Rodolfo had said the same thing, which makes him wonder if his lower body really is that bad. The protagonist asks if they have already arrived, and the Beastman says that the village is just ahead. As soon as he looks forward, he is stunned by the sight of the entire village. He says it even looks like a dragon's lair, and the Beastman asks what that is. Ganghyun tries to explain that it is similar to a place he knows. The Beastman asks if the human village is similar too. The protagonist thinks the situation over because Rodolfo had said the same thing. He had explained that the protagonist could go there without any problem because the Beastmen also revere the White Wolf. Besides that, there are also binding ties. Ganghyun asks what those binding facts are, and the warrior explains that in the past, there were conflicts between species. Those wars lasted for hundreds of years, and as a result, the continent was engulfed in flames, and countless people were wiped out. If the war had continued like that, the destruction of the continent would not have been a mere joke. If the gods, who could not bear to watch any longer, had not intervened, things would have ended very badly. After that, a binding pact was created to prevent conflicts between species. Naturally, interaction was also restricted. That is why the protagonist was wondering whether the beast people living in that village would welcome him well. As they walked, some people stared at him, saying that he really is a human and looks weaker than expected. On top of that, the sacred wolf was there as well. Suddenly, another beastman approaches and asks if he is the human the village chief summoned, because he cannot understand why he was invited. The protagonist gets worried, but the beastman beside him steps forward and tells Tamed to remember that he is a guest personally invited by the village chief herself. But Tamed still refuses to accept that and asks since when he became so obedient and where he sold his dignity to the village chief. Noah points out that he is only following the village chief's orders, so Tamed needs to step back. Tamed says he did not know Noah's influence had grown so much and questions how Noah dares to give him a direct order. Bexiolgi starts growling and the beast people are startled, saying that the sacred wolf is angry. Tamed is surprised when he sees the sacred wolf. Mona also gets angry, showing that she will protect the protagonist. The entire village realizes that even Mona has stepped in front of him, which means there are now 3 powers at once. And that was to be expected, because the protagonist is not just any human. But the truth is that Ganghyun is worried because he was just invited and has no intention of causing trouble. Tamed asks what kind of suffocating situation this is, because he does not want to cause problems since anyone else would do and could help him. Suddenly, the village chief jumps right into the middle of them, saying that she almost broke her neck from boredom while waiting. The protagonist asks who that person is, and Noah tells him to bow. The protagonist asks why, and Noah introduces the woman, saying that her name is Cassandra and that she is the leader of the village. She says he may call her Cassandra or village chief, whichever he prefers. The protagonist bows and thanks her for the invitation, introducing himself. Mona runs over and jumps into her mother's arms. Cassandra tells the protagonist not to be nervous, because this is a day of celebration and gratitude, since her daughter has been spending so much time with him. Ganghyun tries to explain that it is not exactly like that, but she says she knows her daughter's personality very well. Tamed goes over to her and asks why she is thanking a human. Cassandra lets out a breath and asks if he is Tamed the warrior, because she had thought he was some homeless vagabond breaking the pact and harassing a human. Because if he is Tamed the warrior, that makes no sense. And she asks whether he really is him. Tamed starts trembling and says yes, but the leader says that he is far too wise, so he cannot possibly be Tamed, and tells him to leave because she will entertain the guest. Sometime later, inside her tent, she apologizes to the protagonist for the unpleasant experience as soon as he arrived. She explains that the problem is that not everyone is used to humans, but that does not mean they are enemies. He had been very frightened because everyone was staring directly at him, which made him feel as if he might be torn apart at any moment. The leader explains that inviting a human is somewhat unusual. Even so, she wanted to meet the person behind the rumors. Ganghyun asks what rumors she is talking about, while the little wolf simply watches the situation. Cassandra asks whether he truly has never heard about them, because the rumor that a human tamed the sacred wolf is spreading through the forest. She points out that many beings have been watching the protagonist and asks whether he truly could not feel any of those stares. But he wonders whether his camera is broadcasting all of that live too. The Beast People's leader says that is not the most important thing, because what she really wants to know is what the protagonist wants as a reward for taking such good care of her daughter, since Beast People never forget their debts. The protagonist says he does not need to receive anything because he did not do anything special. He merely shared some food. He also says that he brought a little food for her too, since he did not want to show up empty-handed. Cassandra is surprised and asks whether the delicious smell she had been sensing is the gift. He opens his case and says it is nothing much, because he boiled some pork belly along with something to go with drinks. He brings it over to her, saying that he would really like to know whether the amount is enough, but Cassandra asks whether he truly brought such a precious gift, which shows that he is a thoughtful person. She looks at him and says that he also mentioned something to go with drinks and asks whether it is what she thinks it is. He says yes, and shows her a bottle, saying that he also brought some alcohol that she probably will not find around there. Mona clutches the food as if she were holding her own life, and Cassandra holds the drink as if she were protecting her own daughter. She tells the protagonist that those gifts are truly incredible. On top of that, he even managed to domesticate her daughter. The protagonist asks whether that is really the correct way to put it. Ganghyun also warns her that it is better not to drink that beverage right away, because it shook a lot on the journey and may burst if opened. As soon as the guards hear that, they get completely angry, asking whether that gift really can explode, and how that human dared to give something like that to the chief, and saying that now he has revealed his true nature. The protagonist tries to explain the situation, saying that he did not mean it would literally explode because the word burst was only symbolic, since what would really happen is that the gas would build up as foam. Cassandra looks at it and with one motion slices off the top of the bottle, which starts spraying upward. She becomes happy and asks if that is what he meant by saying it would burst like that. However, a few seconds later, she becomes a little sad because the foam is starting to die down. She simply tips the bottle into her mouth and everyone gets worried. They ask if she is really okay after consuming that unknown substance, but she lets out a small roar and starts laughing, saying that this was to be expected because humans are very skilled with their hands. She asks how he made that kind of alcohol because it is delicious and has a unique and wonderful flavor. On top of that, the drink goes down smoothly, coating the whole throat. She points out that the side dish is definitely appetizing, but now she would like to try some of that meat. Ganghyun hands her some. Cassandra takes a bite and is enchanted too, saying that it has no strong gamey smell, and the texture is very soft because she barely chewed and the meat already disappeared in her mouth, as if it melted away. She's so impressed that she asks whether that soft and chewy thing is really meat. She says that the meat is so good that if two people ate it at the same time and then fought to the death, they would not even notice. She adds that everyone will share that meat later. She bows and apologizes to the protagonist, leaving everyone even more surprised. They ask why the village chief is apologizing to a human. Cassandra explains that it is only right to apologize for being rude to such a thoughtful guest. The other beast people realize that they were rude too and apologize to the protagonist, saying that they got overly excited. Ganghyun says it is fine because they were just doing their job. Noah, who had already been ready to start a fight against his own companions, lets out a sigh of relief, saying that unfortunately they stopped just before a major problem began, because a human chosen by the sacred wolf clearly could not be dangerous. Cassandra says that now they must apologize and express their gratitude, so they need to do exactly that. She tells her subordinates to inform all the members of the tribe that they will hold a festival, and since the festival is for their illustrious guest, they must show all of their abilities, and the warrior who captures the most delicious prey will receive the honor of Chaitu. But they were shouting so loudly that the protagonist was almost going crazy. Cassandra was still extremely excited and kept yelling that they needed to show that their festival is the best, but the protagonist still could not understand why villagers from every place love festivals so much. While the warriors are out hunting, Cassandra explains to the protagonist that Chaitu means the best hunter in the tribe. On top of that, they consider it an honor to stand on the front line when the whole tribe goes hunting. The protagonist says that he finally understands and now knows why everyone hunts with so much passion. She asks if he also likes hunting because if he wants, he may join in. Ganghyun refuses, saying that maybe he would end up being hunted instead, so he would rather stay there. Cassandra says that if she were not the leader, she would go hunting herself. But since she cannot, she stays there playing with the children, and she tosses a child away while saying that if he wants help taking care of any of them, she can help with that too. But he feels a little uneasy about that kind of play. The children are happy, and she asks if he would like to join them. The protagonist thinks that kind of game is a little too wild and refuses, saying that he would rather just watch and understand things a little better. Cassandra laughs and agrees, saying that it is better for him to stay there because he smells incredibly good. So the children might accidentally bite him, but she laughs and says that it is fine because they are not jaguars, so they do not eat humans. But one girl is already biting his leg. He finally manages to pull himself free and sees that something has been thrown down beside him. Everyone is impressed because that is a monster from the western forest, a creature so fast that it is difficult to catch even with good legs. But that is only to be expected from the warrior Tamed. Cassandra says that was to be expected because he truly is skilled at hunting. Tamed bows and thanks the leader for the praise. Cassandra asks the protagonist if that does not also seem like a great catch to him, but Tamed tells her to stop because the protagonist has probably never seen prey like that before. So maybe that could hurt his pride. Ganghaeon realizes that Tamed is clearly being sarcastic, but he would rather go along with it than fight. He decides to praise him, saying that it is incredible, and asks how he managed to catch prey that is so cute and amazing, because it is very cute. Tamed gets irritated and asks how the protagonist dares to insult him. Cassandra asks if he really thinks that is cute. The protagonist says yes and asks whether that is not enough, because on top of being cute, it has 4 legs. He tries to explain that Bexiolgi is always hunting disgusting things, so this prey looked cuter to him. Suddenly, the little wolf appears dragging a giant creature by the tail. Everyone is stunned, saying that it is a creature famous for its paralyzing venom, one that even renowned warriors cannot defeat alone. Tamed stares at it and Bexiolgi looks back at him with a mocking face. Tamed becomes furious, and Mona also arrives with her own prey, feeling delighted and thinking she would impress both her mother and the protagonist. But the moment she sees the first 2 catches, she becomes completely dejected. Noah explains that even if it is only a cub, a sacred wolf is still a sacred wolf. Even so, they still are not sure who will win the contest. Cassandra looks at all the prey and says that now that everyone has gathered, she will announce the winner. But Mona's prey gets up and runs away. The leader says that the warrior who will receive the title of Chaitu is Hama. Everyone is shocked, and the leader says that yes, it really is her. Tamed refuses to accept it and tells the village chief that it is only a bird, so why did she win? Cassandra says that apparently everyone misunderstood her orders because she never said to bring back the strongest prey, but the most delicious prey. She points out that simply being good at hunting does not make someone a great hunter, because a hunter needs the wisdom to choose prey that fits the goal and is worthy of Chaitu. She asks if anyone has a problem with the decision she made. Noah says that this is exactly what one would expect from the village chief, because her words are always profound. One of the people next to him asks why his eyes are trembling so much. Cassandra says that now that she has already announced the best hunter, they need to light the fire so the festival can begin. But the person who felt the most relieved by that was the protagonist himself, because he thought he would be in serious trouble if the little wolf had won the contest. And now all he needs to do is quietly enjoy the moment until it is time to leave. The festival begins, but he is not very comfortable. Cassandra asks what he thinks, whether it is not exciting. Ganghaeon asks what she just said because he can barely hear anything over the smell of the prey. He wonders what is wrong with that place, because there is not a single kind of seasoning, and even though it smells like that, they are still just grilling the meat as it is. Ganghaeon asks the leader if it will not be very strange for her to eat the meat like that, but Cassandra asks what he is talking about because meat is supposed to be game. And in truth, it was the meat he brought that was a little unusual. And everyone ate it so quickly because it was really delicious. And as thanks, she says that he can eat as much as he wants. Cassandra asks her daughter why she does not want to eat her favorite meat. Bexiolgi also is not very pleased with the taste of that meat, but the protagonist simply tells him to endure it because there are beast people who are very cautious when dealing with humans, so it is better for him not to get involved. Cassandra stuffs a piece of meat into his mouth, telling him to eat it before it gets cold. But that irritates the protagonist so much that he stands up and says that he is going to cook everything himself. The chief says that is a little strange because guests are supposed to sit and relax, but Ganghaeon tells Bexiolgi to go fetch some sweet fruits for him to use as ingredients. He opens his case to take out his tools and puts the griddle onto heat. The people watch with curious expressions. He thinks that first, he needs to sear the meat over high heat until the surface turns crispy. Then, in a pan with alcohol, he adds some berries and lets it sit for 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, he gets ready to open the pan, and everyone is watching closely. He thinks that the color is right and that it already looks different. He places the meat on a board and starts slicing it. He thinks it is not bad, but the gamey smell is still there. He explains that the berry is similar to Lyron, but unlike Lyron, it is a little excessive. The meat is not pork, it is just that the control was off and it went over the proper point. Cassandra tastes some and is surprised, asking whether that is really the same meat they hunted, because it is very similar to the meat the protagonist brought. It has less gamey odor and is incredibly tender. Mona is also loving the meat. The leader asks how he can still not be satisfied even though the meat is that good. The protagonist explains that this is obvious because he is a chef and his job is to cook so that his food becomes as delicious as possible. He tells everyone to get ready to eat because he is going to cook. Cassandra bursts into loud laughter, saying that she cannot tell whether the protagonist is shy or very bold, but the truth is that she is loving all of this. She says that even though she likes the meat very much, it would be far too much work for him to cook all of that alone for everyone, so she cannot let a guest do that. She tells everyone to get ready and gather the ingredients, which are alcohol and red fruits. Ganghyun says that the meats are different, so it will be a little difficult. The leader approaches the protagonist and says that each person will be responsible for their own because it is the responsibility of each hunter to cook the prey they captured. Even so, she would really like to thank him for showing a little kindness. Everyone goes to him to learn a little about how to do it, and Cassandra simply watches all of it. At the end of the day, they prepare to say goodbye, and Cassandra says that Noah will guide him back. She says that she would have liked to teach them properly, but everyone else is hungover and scattered around. She hands something to the protagonist, saying that it is a gift. He holds it and asks whether it is a flute, but Cassandra says that it is a symbol of friendship with a beast person, and if he ever needs help, he only has to play it and call for her at any time, because now he is a friend of the tribe and will be treated with respect. Ganghyun is happy and thanks her. He thinks that the Beast People village was unforgettable in many ways, full of experiences he could never have in everyday life. And because of that, he does not believe he will have an even more spectacular experience than that. At least not for now. Sometime later, back at his house, a man arrives covered in sweat and asks if there is a seat available. The protagonist thinks that apparently daily life is not easy at all. He welcomes him and asks if he may take his order, but then thinks that he still has not even set that up yet. The man asks for some cold water, as cold as he can serve it. Ganghyun keeps thinking about the security system, wondering how much that would cost him. As soon as the protagonist approaches the table, the man sits down in relief at seeing that it really is a restaurant and says that he will order food. Ganghyun notices that the man does not seem to be from that village. The man asks if he can change the vongole to fettuccine. The protagonist is surprised, but apologizes and says that unfortunately they do not have fettuccine. The man says that is fine because he was only asking to confirm. Ganghyun apologizes again, saying that he does not have fettuccine, but linguine is possible. The man says that in that case, he will have that. Ganghyun returns to the kitchen and starts preparing the meal. However, he has no idea who in a place like that would be concerned about fettuccine. He keeps cooking and points out that linguine is thinner than fettuccine, but wider than spaghetti. Normally, people do not even know the names of the dishes. But that man asked specifically, so maybe he really does like Western cuisine. That made him happy because it had been quite a long time since he had worked in his specialty. Before long, the food is ready, and the protagonist brings the plate to the table, saying that the meal is ready and asking him to enjoy it. The man is surprised by the presentation of the dish, and especially by the smell. He picks up some with his fork and tastes it. He thinks that the flavor of the clams is strong, but there is nothing fishy about it. On top of that, he finds it very balanced, with the right amount of acidity, and it enhances the umami. He realizes that it is impossible for that to be the level of an ordinary restaurant, because being able to eat pasta of that quality in a rural area is basically impossible, unless the chef is that person. The man calls the protagonist over and asks if he has a moment. Ganghyun had been watching TV while cleaning one of the tables. On TV, an announcement was playing saying that Master Jong Gi-hun had once again left his mark on the art world. After winning the Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale, he had received countless admiring calls from overseas. Ganghyun looks at his customer and asks if there is any problem with the food, but the man says no. In fact, he points out that he really liked the flavor and that it is rare to be able to eat Italian cuisine prepared so well around there. Ganghyun tells the man that he is the first person to order pasta in person and asks if he likes Italian food that much. The man says that he ate a lot of it while studying abroad. The protagonist is happy and says that thanks to his customer's order, he was able to show his skills again after a long time. He points out that he can make anything Italian, so the man should feel free to visit whenever he likes. The man asks if minestrone is possible too. Once again, the request leaves the protagonist a little perplexed. It is a traditional Italian soup with vegetables and pasta, an ordinary home-cooked meal in Italy and easy to prepare. But what caught his attention most was that the man's first order had been vongole, then he changed it to linguine, and now he is asking for minestrone. Excited to keep cooking his specialty, the protagonist asks if he should prepare it now or if the man would like to take it for the road, and points out that the dish will take about 30 minutes to be ready. The man says that he will come back the next day and asks him to make it then, and questions why the protagonist is in such a hurry. Ganghyun says that he understands and will prepare it in advance so that when he arrives, he can eat fresh food. The man thanks him for the attention and points out that he does not usually make requests like that, but he thought he could expect that much from the protagonist. He takes off his glasses and introduces himself, saying that his name is Jong Gi-hun. The protagonist is happy to know the man's name and introduces himself as well, But Gi-hun did not expect that reaction and asks if the protagonist does not watch TV. Gang Hyeon says that he does, but Gi-hun decides to let it go and says it is fine and that he will come back tomorrow. As soon as the man leaves, the protagonist wonders why he introduced himself so suddenly. The television is still on, and the report about him is still playing. The presenter points out that the artist Jang Gi-hun, who achieved such feats, has become an inspiration to many painters, and his influence was so great that a drama is being produced about the artist's life. Hearing that news, the protagonist is so shocked that he lets out a yell, scaring the little wolf outside. The next day, Gang Hyeon is apologizing for his rudeness from the day before, because he did not know who he really was and admits that he likes his work very much. Gi-hun looks at him and asks if Gang Hyeon would have believed him if he had introduced himself that way, as an artist, but the protagonist says that he definitely would not have believed him. Gi-hun laughs and says that it is fine, because the truth is that he moved to the countryside because he did not like that kind of thing, which makes him a bit arrogant. But then he changes his mind, saying that maybe it was not his arrogance that brought him there, but the desire to relive the taste of that time. Gang Hyeon brings the minestrone to the table and asks him to enjoy the meal. The renowned artist picks up his spoon and tastes a little. He says that it is very delicious, but the one who is even more impressed is the protagonist himself, seeing that his customer is eating so smoothly. Gi-hun asks if he is really going to watch him eat his meal. He points out that it is indeed delicious, because it had been a very long time since he had eaten food that was so flavorful and full of life, and it turned out so pleasant that if the protagonist said he was from Italy, he would believe him. However, he says that it does not have the same taste he was searching for, because he ate a lot of that while abroad. Gang Hyeon asks where exactly abroad. The man says that decades have passed since he moved to Italy with nothing but the desire to paint. While he was there, he did all sorts of jobs, but even that was not enough to buy the paints he wanted to use. So his meals were always just pasta with salt. It was hard, but he is proud that he never left even a single scrap on his plate. And on the days when his paintings were finally sold, he would go out to eat. But as with every beginning, money was very tight and he could not afford anything expensive. Even so, back then, minestrone with assorted vegetables was also a delicacy for him. Eventually, after enduring everything, an opportunity arose and he seized it. After that, he could never look at Italian food the same way again. But as he grew older, he realized that even painful memories are still memories. That is why he wanted so badly to taste that minestrone again, just one more time. He gets up saying that in any case, memories tend to be idealized, so maybe that was the best thing about that dish. The protagonist is moved and says that maybe he can find it if he searches a little more. Gi-hun thanks the young chef for listening to the story of an old man. The protagonist thinks that the artist, who had to endure everything alone in a foreign land, reminded him of his own life story. He wonders what that might have meant, and because of that, he really wants to do something. He asks the artist if he could explain a little more about that minestrone. Gi-hun says that it was not all that delicious, and that the broth was also a little darker. The protagonist says that happens when you use only cheap vegetables. Gi-hun asks if he knows Amalfi. Since it is by the sea, even the vegetables there always had a fishy taste. The protagonist thinks about all of it and asks the artist if he will have some free time tomorrow. The protagonist continues researching the ingredients, because apparently the ingredients of the dish the artist had approved were based on the region and the household. The broth was cloudy and there was no meat in it. And even with only vegetables, it still had a fishy taste. He thinks that maybe it is caciucco. It is an Italian seafood soup based on fish broth and shellfish. It is made with a generous amount of different fish and shellfish, and perhaps a combination of seafood and tomato could make it a little more refreshing. On top of that, the two dishes are quite similar, and maybe the artist was unable to distinguish one from the other. And perhaps the flavor is remembered differently because of nostalgia. He becomes even more excited and looks up where Amalfi is. When he sees the photos on his computer, he thinks the beach is beautiful and the sea is perfect too, but he thinks there is no way and becomes confused. Even so, he concludes that perhaps the artist's memory is actually very precise. The next day, early in the morning, the bell on the door rings. The protagonist looks up and tells the artist that he spent the entire night thinking about all of that and asks him to sit down because everything will be ready very soon. But Gi-hun is holding his cell phone and asks why the protagonist said that he does not watch much TV. The phone is showing news about the protagonist. One of his videos has millions of views, and one report says that he is the youngest winner of international awards. The artist points out that the protagonist's gaze was always intense, and it is no wonder his food is so good. Gang Hyeon approaches with the food laughing and says that the artist probably does not watch his own broadcasts either. However, the most important thing there is whether the artist is curious about the minestrone. He says that is an obvious question, because he has been searching for that same taste for years. Even so, he points out that the protagonist does not need to try so hard because just listening to the whole story of an old man was already enough for him to remember his old days. Gang Hyeon realizes that the man does not have many expectations, but that is to be expected. because he has probably gone to many restaurants looking for that same taste and never found it. However, his food is different from what any other restaurant can try to make. As soon as he removes the lid, Gi-hun is surprised. The protagonist says that this is a special minestrone made just for the artist. Gi-hun prepares to taste it and wonders if it really was made by the same person from the day before because the smell is fishy and the broth is a little thick. On top of that, he asks if the protagonist did that on purpose to make the taste a little worse. But as soon as he takes a bite, his mind begins to drift, and the memories of his first studio begin to surface. The smell of paint, the sea breeze, everything feels as if he is truly going back to the past. He starts laughing and says that the taste is very bad, and that if he went back to the past and ate the same dish, he would probably throw it away on the spot because he thought he might be able to relive all of that. The protagonist explains that at first he was quite intrigued by the fishy smell the artist had mentioned. Because of that, he thought it might have been made with kachiyuko, but kachiyuko does not taste fishy. Then, his next focus became the dark broth. He kept asking himself why the broth was cloudy and why the fishy taste was so strong. That was when he realized that minestrone had ground shellfish in it. If they grind clams, it becomes thicker, and the broth turns cloudy. The artist is surprised and asks if that is really the case, because a cook would not even think of grinding clams just to make it taste fishy. And apparently that is not something common there. The protagonist looks out the window and says, "Who knows?" Because there are so many ways to make something taste bad that the more important question is why a cook would go to so much trouble. He points out that maybe the reason the chef had no choice but to secretly grind clams was because perhaps she was worried about the health of the young man who was suffering so much abroad. Gi-hun is so surprised and asks if she really might have wanted to protect his pride knowing the circumstances of that young man. He remembers the past and says that if the version of himself from back then had known that, he probably would never have gone back to that restaurant again. And even a gentleman like him cannot escape her. He laughs, saying that that old woman always meddled in unnecessary things. The artist gets ready to leave and says that his house is nearby so he can drop by from time to time. The protagonist says that he will always be waiting for him whenever he wants. Gi-hun looks around and notices that the walls seem a little empty. Gang-hyun asks what he meant by that, but the artist says it is nothing. Then he starts heading toward his car. He tells his driver that it is a secret from his wife because he came there in secret and shouts to the protagonist that they will see each other again soon. As soon as Gang-hyun said goodbye to Gi-hun, he kept looking and said that the driver of that car was no longer visible. Suddenly, a boy approaches saying that he agrees and asks what kind of person he is, since there are all kinds of unusual people in that world. He is Woon-seop. The protagonist is surprised, and Woon-seop greets Gang-hyun and asks how he is doing. But the protagonist, still confused, asks what is going on there. Woon-seop explains that he is on vacation and cannot be bothered to go overseas. So, he was looking for a place that served delicious food at a reasonable price and found that place. However, he asked the protagonist not to worry since he will not stay there for long, promising that it will be 3 days at most. Gang-hyun just needs to make sure there is enough for him to eat for 9 meals. Gang-hyun asks who is going to feed whom. As soon as they enter, Woon-seop is impressed, saying that the renovation turned out great. The protagonist tries to stay in control since he does not need to worry as he is always paid for his work. Woon-seop looks at Bakseolgi, who was lying down, and asks if that is the same dog from last time, since he had never seen that breed before. The protagonist explains that if it is cute, that is enough, and asks Woon-seop to try petting him. He agrees, saying that the dog really is beautiful, and tries to touch him, but Bakseolgi suddenly wakes up, and he dodges. The protagonist says that not even Grandpa, an experienced wild boar hunter, managed to capture Bakseolgi. He serves the water while laughing, since he has already managed to touch the dog, so it was very effective, and if Woon-seop thinks he can do the same, then he should go ahead. Woon-seop realizes that the protagonist only wanted to brag because if he keeps up that attitude, how could he possibly get along with the people in that small village? He asks if Gang-hyun is being ostracized. Gang-hyun serves the water, saying that he is not that bad, and that the villagers even organized a festival for him. Woon-seop starts thinking about how lonely a person must be to have such delusions. The protagonist keeps insisting, telling his friend to believe his words. Suddenly, the protagonist hears someone calling and says it looks like a customer has arrived and that he will be back after a brief break. Gang-hyun goes to see who it is. As soon as he reaches the other side, he sees Minho, who asks if the protagonist was resting. Gang-hyun says that is not the case since he was already working in the kitchen, and asks if his friend is there to eat. Minho says no because he is only there to give him a gift. Gang-hyun is surprised to see a 5-fingered glove. Minho explains that his wife made it herself, since the abalone porridge the protagonist gave them last time was delicious. Gang-hyun is shocked to hear that Sujin made all of that by herself, since it shows that she's very skilled. Besides, she had made a dog in the middle of the glove to represent Bakseolgi, making everything even more beautiful. Minho says that is true, and that his wife wanted to deliver the gift personally, but unfortunately she still cannot leave the house. Gang Hyun thanks him for the gift and asks him to tell his wife that he will use it every day. Sang-hoo and Mi-young arrive at the protagonist's restaurant, and he asks why they are there instead of going to school. Sang-hoo explains that they are on vacation, so they will not go to school for the next few days, but the truth is that he has a homework problem he still has not been able to solve. So he came there because the protagonist might be able to help him solve it. Gang Hyun tells him that it is admirable to see a child already working on his vacation homework instead of wasting time. While Gang Hyun was trying to help, the village chief also arrives at the restaurant, saying that this time the place is quite crowded, since the protagonist has become the local celebrity. The protagonist greets him, saying that everyone is arriving at the same time, as if it were a scheduled meeting. Meanwhile, Woon-sop was watching all of that through the window, and when he sees the smile on the protagonist's face, he realizes that he really is doing very well in that place, because he had heard that Gang Hyun might be feeling very lonely, so he decided to visit him. But from the looks of it, there was no need for all that concern. So his only task from then on is to eat as much as he can over the next 3 days and then return home. As he goes up the stairs, he admits that the protagonist really is very good at socializing with people, which makes him even more impressive. Gang Hyun realizes that something is wrong and asks the village chief what he is doing there. The village chief explains that he is only there doing a household survey because they need people to help with the harvest. Because of that, he would like to ask if the protagonist could spare 1 or 2 days of his life to help. Besides, he will properly pay everything they agree on. It is not a big job, so it only depends on the protagonist, and if he really cannot help, he can go look for someone else in town. Gang Hyun still finds that story a little confusing, because harvest time should only happen in autumn. But since there are no customers, he can help, even though it is still very inconvenient to have an unwanted guest at home. The village chief notices that the protagonist is taking a while to answer, and asks if it is too difficult because, if it is, that is fine. He was just asking to see if he could find someone. Gang Hyun explains that it is not that and asks the village chief if he needs all the help he can get right now. Because of that, he commits to helping, saying that the chief came to the right place. He asks the village chief to check if his house is available for 2 people. Sometime later, in the middle of the field, Woon-sop was furious, promising to kill his friend someday. Gang Hyun returns with some potatoes, telling Grandma Park that all the potatoes on that side are already ripe. Besides, he also needs to know which ones he should dig up from then on. She is surprised to see that the protagonist has finished again, saying that he never gets tired and, from the looks of it, has more stamina than it seems. Gang Hyun starts thinking about his stamina and realizes that it has indeed improved a lot. And maybe it is because he has been running every morning for Rodolfo's training. Park tells the protagonist that it is almost time for a break, so he can rest a little since his friend has been there since early on. Gang Hyun explains that he has no problem leaving him waiting, so she can give him the next task. Woon-sop was still furious, because while the protagonist worked hard and kept going like that, he himself would take a look at the funeral home that would bury that bastard. A little later, the two had stopped to rest for a while and take the chance to eat. Woon-sop says that he should have imagined all of this when the protagonist started preparing the village meeting that morning. Gang Hyun asks why he always shows up without warning, but his friend was furious, since the protagonist was ruining his vacation with more hard work. After all, that guy never raised him that way. The protagonist asks who raised whom. Everyone else was also eating, and the protagonist says that he understands now, saying that he is sorry about it and would like to know what his friend wants for dinner, because he will make anything to cheer him up a little. Woon-sop asks if he can make jambalaya. The protagonist asks if he is talking about that American street food he knows. Then he says he thought his friend would ask for something more expensive and complicated, but Woon-sop simply says that is what he wants, and that it does not need to be anything extravagant. A little later, back at the restaurant, Gang Hyun was cooking. Woon-sop looks at the pot and asks why the protagonist is frying shrimp shells. Gang Hyun explains that throwing them away is a huge waste, so they can use all the shells. If he makes a broth with shrimp heads, the innards would also come out, and that makes it more flavorful and sweet. While the broth boils, he needs to fry the sausages in butter. Once the sausage is browned, he needs to add the chicken. Once the chicken is cooked, he just needs to add soaked rice. With everything mixed together, he can add the pre-cut vegetables and gradually add the sauce and broth. Then he adds the prepared shrimp, covers it, and waits a little. That way the dish is complete. Woon-sop sees Baek Seol-gi eating and asks if dogs can really eat that food. The protagonist explains that it is fine, and his friend is surprised, saying that the world has become very nice. He thinks about whether Hyung liked that dish. He's almost sure he did, but he cannot remember exactly. Woon-sop says that this is the dish the protagonist made the first time he visited his house. Gang Hyun asks if that really happened. His friend explains that yes, because he wanted to eat out, so the protagonist said he would cook. But they did not have many ingredients at home, and Gang Hyun managed to make that dish. However, what was most impressive was that even with few ingredients, the dish was delicious, which made everything even more absurd. He tries a little of the dish and realizes that the rice is tasty. The seafood and vegetables are also well seasoned, making it even tastier than what is bought in first-rate restaurants. And that was already expected, because even after so much time, the dish is still as delicious as it was the first time. That is why he is certain that the protagonist will do even better than he always has. Ever since the first time he tasted that dish at his house, he already knew the protagonist would succeed. That is exactly why he can say that his sense of taste will return soon. Ganghyun asks if he had not already said that his sense of taste had returned. His friend is surprised and asks when it went back to normal. Ganghyun explains that it was not long ago. However, his sense of taste has not fully returned, but it is already basically half of what it used to be. Woonseop realizes that this country life is really working for him. The stress of the city and that whole celebrity thing was causing abnormal stress. And since that is great news, he would like to know if the protagonist was thinking about going back to Seoul. Ganghyun takes a deep breath and says he still does not know. He thinks that before he did not want to go back to that city because he was very afraid, but now he is loving his new life. Woonseop hands him a drink and says he is right because there is no rush since he has not fully recovered yet. So all they need to do for now is celebrate the successful life he's having in the countryside. Ganghyun is happy and says he is impressed by his friend's words. The two toast to celebrate and continue talking for a while. The next day, in the other world, the protagonist was in his training. Rodolfo was still able to disarm him with ease, however. He says that progress was happening since the protagonist managed to last about 1 second longer than last time. Besides, his stamina is also improving faster than they imagined. Rodolfo says that for someone the protagonist's age and with his low experience, lasting 5 seconds is already a lot. Ganghyun looks at his hands, which were full of calluses, thinking that this means he will be eliminated in 5 seconds. A month had already passed since he started learning swordsmanship from Rodolfo. Even though he was only practicing blocking sword strikes, he still had not managed to properly withstand the attacks. Rodolfo asked the protagonist to get ready, because this time, he is going to put a little more strength into it, so he needs to stay alert. Ganghyun gets scared because he could barely endure the first strikes, let alone a stronger one. Rodolfo senses Noah's presence and asks him to come out. Noah is surprised to see that Rodolfo managed to sense his presence, and that is not bad at all. Mona was with him and is happy to see the protagonist running toward him. Rodolfo asks Ganghyun if that beast warrior is someone he knows. Bexiolgi comes charging in and knocks Mona away so she cannot get close to his master. The protagonist explains that she is the person who invited him to the beast village last time. Noah praises Rodolfo, asking if it is really possible for a warrior of that caliber to exist among humans. Rodolfo laughs, saying that from the looks of it, the beast's eyes are quite sharp, and asks if he is also interested in training together with them. The protagonist says Rodolfo could simply ask him directly, but Rodolfo says that he would like to do that. However, he does not have translation artifacts like the protagonist does. Noah gets a little lost in the conversation and asks what that person is saying. Ganghyun also could not understand what exactly a translation artifact was. Rodolfo explains that he is from another region, but they are talking normally, and that is probably because of an artifact. The protagonist starts thinking about the matter because he had never questioned how they could communicate so easily. Rodolfo says that the beast probably came there for a reason, and since the training was almost over anyway, they can end it for today. He asks the protagonist to come back with more stamina next time. As soon as he leaves, Ganghyun asks Noah why he is there. Noah explains that Mona wanted to visit him, so he came along with her. He changes the subject and asks if the protagonist was really learning swordsmanship. Ganghyun tells him not to worry because it is nothing. They had made an exchange after the protagonist provided some food. Rodolfo proposed teaching swordsmanship as a form of gratitude, so he started learning. Noah gets a little upset and calls out to the protagonist, saying that he has also received food before. Ganghyun asks if he is talking about the shrimp, which was nothing, but Noah insists on the subject, saying that he also received the meat the protagonist had taken as a gift to the village, and that counts as 2 times. So it is only fair that he repay all the favor. Ganghyun starts to get worried because he already had a strange feeling. He tries to refuse, saying that there is no need for that because everything is fine between them. But Noah had already made up his mind and does not take no for an answer, saying that this is how it should be. So he will teach him martial arts from that moment on. The protagonist remains frightened, wondering why his bad premonitions are always right. Noah notices that Ganghyun did not have a good reaction and asks if he really thinks swordsmanship alone is enough, and if that means martial arts are inferior to human swordsmanship. Ganghyun realizes that the subject is becoming personal and decides to show gratitude, saying that he is very excited and asks when he can start learning. Noah asks him to get into a lower position because if he wants it that much, they can begin immediately. The martial arts of the leader of the beasts are the strongest. Because of that, they will start with the most basic part of martial arts. The protagonist remains worried because he has already gone through hell with Rodolfo's training, and if he keeps going like this, it will practically be a death sentence. Noah tells him to get down on the ground like a dog. As soon as the protagonist crouches down, Noah says that he will teach him the most basic part of martial arts, called quadruped running. And for it to work, he needs to run to the top of that mountain while maintaining the same position. But Gang Hyeon is not very happy about that. A long time later, inside his house, lying in his bed, Gang Hyeon was trembling and even having trouble breathing. He thinks he cannot get up because of the muscle pain. However, he decides to endure it. With great effort, he manages to get out of bed and does some stretches to ease the pain in his shoulders, because he could not believe there was training even worse than Rodolfo's. And if Baek Seolgi had not woken him up, he would still be lying in bed sleeping. But at least the fur of his dear dog seems to have healing effects. The truth, however, is that the protagonist wishes that fur also had the power to heal the human spirit. But he decides to let that go and do what needs to be done. While organizing some things, he picks up a seasoning in his hand and remembers that the beast people do not seem to use seasoning separately, which makes him wonder if they really do not have the concept of spices in that other world. However, he remembers that Rodolfo could understand what seasoning was to a certain extent, so from the looks of it, only the beast leaders do not know such a thing. And eating meat that way is an insult to an animal that died and even to the meat on the plate. So maybe he needs to take some sauce to the other world. Even so, he would still face the logistics problem because he cannot always carry things from one world to the other, so maybe the best option is to obtain it locally. Gang Hyeon realizes that there may be an easier way out since Rodolfo's village probably has some spices. However, he did not imagine what could happen, since he only wanted to ask casually, but Rodolfo had readily invited him. As soon as they arrive at the village, all the guards were ready, saying that the captain and his friends had just arrived. The protagonist is shocked and asks what all of that is. Rodolfo explains that those are just normal exercises, since the place had recently changed. But the protagonist thinks that maybe it is just an abuse of power to show him a warm reception. Rodolfo explains that, to be honest, he had been a little disappointed. Although he had not said anything, he felt that the protagonist had a longer connection with the beasts since he had visited their village. And this time, he was there to go after the beast people, but since the protagonist has arrived, he will treat him very well. Gang Hyeon asks if all those guards are his subordinates. Rodolfo says yes, because, as he said before, he is the Knight Commander. Gang Hyeon asks if that game does not have very high rankings, but Rodolfo says it is still too early for him to be surprised, because he has one more thing prepared for the protagonist. An old man appears, asking if that young man is the friend Rodolfo had talked about so much. Rodolfo says yes and asks if that is enough, because he will rarely have that chance, so if necessary, he will beg. The old man tells the Knight Commander that if this is his wish, then he will grant it. Gang Hyeon is surprised because those clothes, that beard, and even that mustache mean that this person is a mage. The old man welcomes him to Rement's territory. The old man introduces himself, saying that his name is Rement, and that he is a mage who will launch welcome fireworks for the protagonist. Gang Hyeon was still surprised by all of that because sorcerers are a little strange. Rement starts firing the fireworks. Gang Hyeon watches and asks if that is really magic, but he does not show any kind of reaction. Rement notices that he was not very surprised and asks if the protagonist has encountered magic before, because this is to be expected from an acquaintance of Rodolfo, since he is not just an ordinary person. But the truth is that the protagonist was thinking that the mage is less efficient than conventional fireworks from his real world. Rodolfo gives the protagonist another outfit, saying that it looks very good on his body because the original clothes he was wearing were too flashy. He explains that this street leads straight to the market, so he can look around whenever he wants because he has some business at the castle and will return soon. If anything bothers him, he only has to use Rodolfo's name and things will be resolved quickly. Besides, there is a party happening that night and Rodolfo promises to come back to pick him up before the party. But the protagonist was only impressed by the goods being sold. He starts walking through the place, thinking that he had indeed expected to find a market, but he never imagined it would be so varied. He sees some red things and picks them up, thinking they look like a dried flower, but they do not smell like anything. However, he cannot tell just by the smell what they are used for. Rement explains that kokso is usually put in stew. Besides, he heard that they only serve it in water in hot regions. Gang Hyeon looks at the mage and asks why he is there. Rement explains that Rodolfo asked him to accompany the protagonist. He had asked himself why that boy needed an escort just to take a look around the market, but now he understood the reason. Rement asks if Gang Hyeon needs ramyun. He asks the shopkeeper to wrap up some ramyun to go. The protagonist is surprised and says that it is fine, but the mage says he does not need to worry since money was overflowing. He throws the goods into the protagonist's hands, asking if he needs anything else. Gang Hyeon's eyes begin to shine. Rement points out that the protagonist's reaction was much more intense when seeing the goods than when he saw magic. A short time later, they sit on a bench, and the protagonist thanks the mage for buying so many things for him. Rement explains that he does research, so he has nowhere to spend so much money. The protagonist thinks that, with that amount of seasonings, he can cook a variety of dishes. Rement asks where he is going to use so many ingredients. The protagonist explains that he wants to try studying the ingredients of that place. Rement is surprised, asking if he is really planning to write a thesis. The protagonist laughs and says it is not something that grand. He just wants his new friends to enjoy their meals more. Since the seasonings of that place are different from the seasonings he normally has, he would like to research them thoroughly before saying a little more about them. Rement finally manages to understand why the white wolf is by the protagonist's side. Ganghyeon asks if Rement is not hungry after walking so much. He takes a lunchbox out of his bag, saying that he prepared it himself, and asks the mage to try it. He presents the dish, saying that it is called bukujang and that it is delicious. Rement says he will accept that gesture of kindness. He takes some, thinking that it has already been 3 days since his last meal, but as soon as he tries a piece, he thinks that he thought it was thin bread, but it is completely different. The main vegetables are unfamiliar, but the flavor is refreshing and matches his taste. The chewy and soft batter disappears in his mouth in an instant, making that dish incredibly delicious. Rement asks if he could eat a little more. The protagonist says yes and tells him to eat as much as he wants. Rement takes another piece and thinks that it has been a while since he ate for the taste of food, since he did not even usually eat because he was too lazy. Ganghyeon notices that the mage was eating a lot and says that maybe he is very hungry, asking if he wants some more. But the mage was only thinking that the dish was terrifyingly good. The protagonist, still curious, asks the mage why he needs an escort just to take a look around the market, asking if there are some kind of thieves or something like that. Rement points out that it would be easier to deal with them if they were only thieves. Suddenly, Baekseolgi gets irritated and Ganghyeon asks what is happening. Rement explains that the white wolf is a noble being that appears in legends, but not everyone venerates white wolves, especially those people who worship gods. The man walks up to them, saying that it has been quite some time since he saw Rement outside the laboratory. Rement points out that he occasionally goes out to get some sunlight and changes the subject, asking the worshipper of gods what brings him to a public square like that, because that place does not seem like somewhere a venerable archbishop would visit. Upon hearing archbishop, the protagonist is shocked, because this is the highest-ranking person within a church. The archbishop says that he sometimes visits places like that to guide lost souls, but that day he has a different mission. He looks at the protagonist, asking if he is the master of the White Wolf, because he would like to talk for a bit. Ganghyeon thinks that there was a similar situation in the Beast Village. They did not show the same hostility toward the protagonist, but those people are suspicious of Baekseolgi. The archbishop says that if the protagonist has some free time, it would be very good for them to go to the church together. Ganghyeon does not know what to answer, but the archbishop promises that he will not harm him, because he has business with the White Wolf and the church is curious about the White Wolf in many ways. Rement tells Archbishop Bahram that this young man is a friend of Lord Rodolfo, and Rodolfo himself had assigned Rement to personally guide him through the village. So why is Bahram taking him away so suddenly, since he should ask for permission before doing that? Bahram is a little surprised, asking if they are really talking about Lord Rodolfo. A girl approaches the archbishop, pointing out that when looking closely at that boy, he really was the one Lord Rodolfo brought so grandly that morning. So perhaps they should be a little more cautious with their words and actions. Bahram thinks carefully about it since he did not want to pick a fight with the Knight Commander. He apologizes to the protagonist, saying that he had not realized he already had a prior commitment. And that is truly a shame, but there is nothing they can do. Therefore, he hopes to see him again if there is another opportunity. Rement was quite effective, and as the protagonist himself can see, he will not have problems with that person again. Ganghyeon thanks him for his kindness, since the mage had even been ready to use his magic to defend him. Since even that small flame from before had already been difficult for the mage, this worries him, because he could faint this time. Rement thinks that the young boy is very tense. He explains that the magic from before was difficult because it involved complex calculations in basic magic. And since they have plenty of time, he will explain that famous spell to the protagonist. The spell itself has more than 20 calculations. He begins to explain that it is mentioned in ancient texts that even the great sorceress Christabel was its author. He continued explaining for many hours. Just as night was about to fall, Rodolfo returns and asks the protagonist if something is wrong and why his ears were bleeding. Ganghyeon did not expect the mage to explain the calculations for 3 hours straight. He changes the subject and says that he is fine, asking who all those people having fun there are. Rodolfo explains that they are all subordinates who came there voluntarily, but the protagonist should not look at them that way, since everyone is curious about him. But the protagonist was thinking that Knight Commander Rodolfo made all his subordinates work overtime to show how grand the party was. Rement asks the protagonist not to be so overwhelmed by everyone looking at him, because he does not need to feel pressured, he just needs to eat and drink comfortably. Rodolfo also asks him to try some of that freshly grilled meat. Jennifer serves some food to the protagonist and he thanks her. She says it must be very difficult for him to deal with Rodolfo, but the protagonist says it is not exactly like that. She is surprised because she had heard that Rodolfo took the protagonist as his disciple, so he must be going through a lot. Rodolfo asks Hana to eat quickly because that is how she will be able to grow. He also starts offering food to the protagonist, telling him to eat a lot because they had plenty of meat. Gangyeon asks Hana if they should also serve the young wolf after he finishes eating. She points out that the wolf must be hungry too. Rodolfo asks if she is serious. She explains that while she was not looking, the meat disappeared. Gangyeon thinks that by this point, Baekseolgi's stomach must already be full, because he had been fasting all morning. Some other guests look at their tables and ask when they finished eating, but the truth is that Baekseolgi was stealing everyone's food. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new content. Thank you.